All right. So everybody, we had been working on Senate File 131, prohibition on delivery of unsolicited ballot forms. I can't remember where we were on this. Did we get all the public testimony? Is there more public testimony? Senator Hutchings? Senator Hutchings is saying we were just ready to take a vote, but I think there might be some public input that we might. All right, who would like to talk to us first? Marguerite? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
good morning. Pull it up close because we're terrible at hearing in this room.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. And my name is Marguerite Herman. I'm here for the League of Women Voters, and I'm here to speak against this bill because I think it's built on a faulty premise that, number one, there is an official ballot request form that gets counterfeited and sent around under false premises that it is an official form and that it may result in fraud. We don't have any evidence that people receiving the forms has led to fraudulent voting. In fact, I've confirmed with the county clerks that they would never send out 2 absentee ballots to the same voter. So it doesn't cause ballots to be sent out. It's a ballot form we're talking about. And I think there might have been some confusion last week. So it doesn't seem to help anything. There was some voter confusion, and I think that was because, and I think you received an email from Laramie County Clerk Deb Lee, that if there was confusion, it was because that the some candidates sent them out and indicated it was a quote-unquote official election form or something like that. The fact is there is no official form, and the fact is that various forms are used and they're available on websites. So it's not this restricted, only certain custodians have it and can send it out anyway. So and then on the other side, and I think the League of Women Voters takes the idea that if you're going to restrict something, there has to be a benefit attached to it. There is no benefit attached to this restriction. And I think that in general, anything that increases voter awareness, information, and access to whatever ballot is, in person, voting, early voting, or absentee is a good thing. And so and for that reason would oppose this. You could advise, or the Secretary of State's office could advise candidates, please don't represent this as an official form. And other than that, I don't think there's a need for this bill. Whatever confusion and irritation there is, believe me, everyone in the state gets irritating campaign materials, repetitive and maybe of dubious value, but some of value. And so it's just one more mailing that people get. And if it makes a few, like I think the clerks testified, that there are some people who always vote by absentee ballot. But there were a lot of people who did it for the first time, may not have been aware of deadlines or the access, how to get it, that sort of thing. And if it increased the awareness of that, then that's on the good side of having it available. Once again, it shouldn't be given out as in some kind of official document. It should be given out simply as, you could download this from your website, but here it is, and in paper you can fill it out and send it in, that this is available to voters. So I think we see the benefit of having people distribute it, inform about it, and there's maybe a way to do it that creates less irritation and confusion. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Herman? Any questions? Thank you very much. Who's next? Ms. Langford? Anybody else? Any other public testimony on Senate File 131? Is there anything online? Nobody's up this early. Last chance in the room, Senate File 131. Okay, we'll close public testimony. Committee, you've heard the discussion. What is your pleasure? Got a motion by Boner. Discussion. Who wants to go first? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I reached out to a couple of clerks, and honestly, they don't have any problem with any of this. It's kind of a bill looking for a problem. But I think when we get to it, Mr. Chairman, I've got an idea that maybe we can amend this and take care of it a little easier. I have a little bit of heartburn with the penalty clause, but anyway.
Do you want to telegraph where you're going?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. At the top of page 2, I just thought that what we might consider doing on line 3, if we get to the word means, unless requested, it would read, unless requested to do so by a qualified elector, no person shall distribute an absentee ballot request form by mail, email, or any other means. And my suggested amendment would be, which claims to be an official election document.
Okay.
So that's a thought, and maybe we can talk about that.
All right. Let's put it out there for thinking. Any other folks? Anybody on the committee? Let's hear from Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in our packets this morning was a proposed amendment, and I don't recall if we knew who it was supplied by, or if someone in the room supplied it. So that would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's no name on it.
Exactly. So everybody, you could help us. We've got one that says Senate File 131 Proposed Amendment. It looks like this. Why don't you grab the microphone, Senator Hutchings? I'm sorry they can't hear us online. Appreciate your help figuring out. Seems like it was a long time ago.
It does. Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
The county clerk had amendments, clerks, and the Secretary of State brought amendments as well. So, and I'm not opposed to either one.
Okay.
Both.
Let's hear, Ms. Langford, can you refresh our memory about the county clerk's amendment?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee.
Morning.
My name's Mary Langford, and I represent the county clerks. The amendment that was discussed, I believe, at the last meeting that was the clerk's amendment, was to exempt the Secretary of State and the county clerks from this prohibition so that they'd be able to do their business, to be able to not have anything construed to be a ballot form or any of that type of thing. And that was the amendment that was proposed, but I don't know, sir, if that's what you have in front of you.
It's not the one we have in front of us, but I do remember that one. I'm looking at my packet, and we may have to recreate that. But and then Senator Hutchings, this one, it starts page 2, line 1 after E, delete the rest of the line. Yeah, thank you, Senator Barlow. I was going to give you a copy. We don't know where this one came from. Does anybody have the other amendments in your packet? Okay. We don't have the other amendments around, do we? Okay. Maybe it wasn't handed out. We're going to take a little time out while they figure out what the Second Amendment does. We don't even know where it came from, so. Senator Scott.
I don't have any knowledge of the paternity of this amendment. I think Senator Landon's suggestion is superior anyhow.
It sounds like it might be. Okay. Well,
I believe this came from the Secretary of State's office. Because their concern was that they wanted to make sure an individual elector requested the ballot, Mr. Chair, and not someone in their family or a mom, a dad, a brother, or sister requesting a ballot for another elector. It had to be the elector, the qualified elector specifically solicits an absentee ballot request form.
Gotcha. I think that's what it does. So maybe the Secretary of State's office will get here and we'll take it up. But, right, let's go back to you, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just honing in on what I think the heartburn really centered, according to at least one or two clerks I visited with, and Ms. Langford, maybe you could chime in on this. It just feels like the heartburn came over, this is an official form. We get that out of the way, and otherwise I've got problems with the bill, because what we're doing here is making it a penalty. It literally goes against free speech. So, we're kind of walking a tightrope on that front. Can you help us on that front? Isn't that really the heartburn, is that people were confused by this as an official document?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
ahead.
Landon, I believe that's exactly it, is that these forms, there isn't an official form for a ballot request. There's statutory requirements of what that ballot request needs to have. So if you request a ballot, you have to give your name, your address, your birth date, some of that information, and that's statutory. But as far as a form, there's a form that the clerks use, and that's basically what has been sent out to people, but there's not an official form. It's the required information. I think that's one of the heartburns. The other one is I believe that there was concern when those forms were sent out, they were mail ready. And so you filled out your information, and on the backside, here is the name of your local county clerk and mailing address to where you send that. And there's some political implications to that people were concerned about, I believe, because county clerks are running for election at the same time. And I think that was some of that as well. I believe that the concern also is that those ballot request forms should come officially, as opposed to randomly from candidates, or they could come from PACs, they could come from parties, they could come from anywhere at this point in time, and maybe tighten that up to, official folks.
So, Ms. Langford, I'm thinking we think there's a free speech argument here, that we don't want it to be misrepresented as being some kind of an official form, but we do indeed think that it's free speech to send out these forms. So, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I heard that last week, I looked up in our Constitution, Article 1, Section 20, we do have freedom of speech and the freedom to write about any subject, but we are subject to be responsible for what we're doing. If we send out a document, gentlemen, that gives the appearance of being official, no matter who's sending it out, there's a little deception in there. And in this era of people wondering, are our votes being about voter integrity, this is where this bill comes into play. We want to have that stance in Wyoming, that we do care about what the voters think, that we do want to do all we can to give the appearance that we have voter integrity here in our state. So again, yeah, it's free speech. Maybe you could put void on there, or this isn't an official ballot on your mailer, but these do look deceptive, and there is an appearance of evil. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is let's stop that. Let's make our candidates be aware of what they're doing and how it can be perceived by some of those vulnerable adults that we know are out there. Not everybody is educated on what the forms look like, or even really sometimes what a ballot looks like. So when some people got those and they actually mailed them in, that's case in point. They were deceived. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Committee, further discussion? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I just go back to, prohibiting this is not, make sure that it doesn't make the claim that it's an official form. And I guess I don't see any problem with going door to door with a handwritten note saying, here's what you need to fill out and send it in to Ms. Langford, and she'll get you an absentee ballot, right? I mean, I guess I'm still trying to hone in on what the problem is that this bill's trying to solve. And the only thing I could come up with is that somebody might think it's an official form.
I'm thinking of all the mailers you get that say, official US mail, and they're about your social security, and they look official, but they're not.
Important information.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I remember when I got this one in the mail, I thought it was the county clerk doing it because of that official form thing.
I did too.
And it took me a while to figure out that it wasn't. I think the proposed proposed amendment fixes it just fine.
So thank you, Senator Scott. I remember getting this as well, and I was actually involved in this particular campaign. I thought, well, this is a real mistake. This is good. This is not a good idea. Anybody else? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our registration forms, because we're talking about an absentee request form, are the registration forms themselves also available to the public in any form so that somebody could present them, prepare them, and then bring them to the office to present them to the clerks? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did you get that? I'm having a real hard time hearing this morning because there's some buzz.
It
Yeah.
is hard.
It's trying to push air in here to keep the place warm, I guess, is what's happening. So we really have to get the microphones close and talk. So did you hear the question from Senator Barlow about the registration? Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, registration forms are available. They're available online. You can take them and fill them out, take them to the county clerk's office. You can distribute them. A person can't go out and collect registration forms and that type of thing, but they can go in one by one to the county clerk through the mail, by hand, by the person. But yeah, those forms are available.
And they're not affected by this bill, right?
No, they're not.
Senator Hutchings.
Again, when I went upstairs last week, I received a email where an elderly woman wrote in, Mr. Chairman, sorry, and mentioned to me, my husband's been dead for several years, and we're still getting requests for absentee ballots. And she said, please pass this bill. So if it's happening to her, it's happening to other people as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, wouldn't that
Hold that
be-
mic.
Wouldn't that be
you go.
a concern with the voter list, not with the fact that you can look up somebody in the phone book and send them something in the mail? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any response to that?
Yeah, I think he's making my point that, Mr. Chair, that we don't want unsolicited ballot forms going out. So if you can look me up on the registration document that we get as candidates, I don't want to send you an unsolicited ballot form. If you, when I come and knock on your door and you say you want to vote absentee, I want to have information for you where you can go or call in or whatever the process is on your computer or whatever to request your own form. I don't want an unsolicited ballot form. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And Senator Hutchings, it's a personal thing for me, but I really prefer Mr. Chairman instead of chair. It's just, I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, and I will try to honor that.
Thank you. It's just, I'm old school.
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. All right, back to you, committee. Is there a motion on the bill? Yeah, we got a motion by Boner. Any proposed amendments? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll move an amendment, line 3, page 2, after the word means. We would strike the rest of that language and insert which claims to be an official election document.
Claims to be an official,
Election document.
okay?
That'll get us started anyway. We can discuss that and move on from there, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we might have to deal with other things in the bill, including the penalty. So discussion on the amendment. Any discussion? Do folks understand it? Should we call for the question? All those in favor of Senator Landon's amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? I think that's carried. Back on the bill, Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I think we had some input that we don't want to affect an actual county clerk or secretary of state with this bill. So what I propose is on page 2, line 2, between person and shall, insert except a county clerk or the secretary of state.
Okay. We get that? Discussion? All those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment is carried. Do we need the, looking down at the penalties on lines 13 and 14, it says distributing unsolicited absentee ballots in violation of this statute. Seems like we've watered that down a little bit. Maybe, do we need that penalty?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be inclined not to have the penalty in there, but it's not a deal breaker.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Scott.
the penalty's old language.
Say that again, Senator
The
Scott.
penalty's old language, so we don't want to mess, I think, with
Can you get
that.
that microphone kind of pointing at your mouth? There you go.
The penalty's old language, so I don't think we want to mess with the penalty. It's just a standard high misdemeanor. But is the question, do we need to change the absentee ballot to official election document?
So I think my suggestion, Senator Scott, I think you're absolutely correct. 22-26-112 is the penalties. And it just says, unless a different penalty is specifically provided in this code, the following, and it has a penalty listed. I would suggest that we don't need lines 13 and 14. And really what we could do is take the whole penalties out of the bill, but because that's old law. But I don't think that calling out Romanet 9 is helpful. Tell me what people think about that.
Romanet 11? Yeah.
Yeah, Romanet 11. Little dyslexia coming through there.
That's all right.
Sorry about that. Anyway, comments on that? Are you good with that? All right. Okay, so we could do two things. We could just remove, probably our staff will do this when we get there anyway, but lines 5 through 15 will be coming out of the bill is what's actually going to happen, because we're not changing the old language. And I'm on page 2. Do people agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so would they offer a motion in that area?
Mr. Chairman, I would so move.
Okay, so the motion is to
Strike 5 through 15.
strike 5 through 15 out of the bill, or delete. Okay, Senator Boner?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm struggling to understand the reason for striking the penalty. It seems like the bill would be somewhat pointless if there's no penalty for it. How would we enforce this provision if there's no penalty?
Senator Barlow, you want to cover this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this actually says unless there's a penalty prescribed elsewhere, this is the penalty. And I would say, Mr. Chairman, that singling out E, which is the new language, And if you go take a look at A, B, and C, excuse me, B, C, and D, D, I'll just read D to the committee and to the audience. No organization or person on behalf of an organization shall obtain an absentee ballot for an elector. I mean, that's something we've already put in the law. And that automatically, the default is current statute, which is current statute. So this actually makes it consistent with how this section is already being treated, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and so Senator Boner, if we remove these lines from the bill, they still apply, they're still law, and they would apply to the acts of little e. So we're not going in and changing the law and removing a penalty. We're just saying that the bill doesn't need to address it because we're not changing it. So that would be Senator Landon's motion if he still wants to make it. Senator Scott?
Look at page 2, line 8. The following acts, if knowingly and willfully committed. I think you have to list the acts or this penalty doesn't cover them.
You might be right. We should, Barlow's got that open. Okay, let's double check on that.
That might be a good catch, Mr. Chairman. I thought it defaulted to the penalty, and that we would not need this, but Senator Scott might be right.
I'm going to try to pull it up too.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Cutchings.
this is only like the second time I've been in this room, and I don't know, in this room, are we supposed to be hearing what you're saying? Because we cannot hear what
Thank
you
you for
guys are
that.
saying.
We have to get right
And
on top of these
so
microphones.
sad.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, this is the worst room in the Capitol for sound. And we got the oldest dudes up here, and
Yeah, wait a minute, Mr.
3 out of 5.
Senator Boner just took a lot of.
Yeah, he's a
Chair,
great-
if I'm hearing you guys right, you guys are saying that we probably need 9 in there. Is that what I heard, Mr.
We're going to
Chair?
double check. So we're going to the penalties section
Thank you.
now. And
So Senator Hutchings, my motion was made with the thought that we defaulted to the penalty anyway, and so that we didn't need the additional language in the bill. It wasn't to remove any penalty, it's that the penalty was already in statute, I thought.
okay, so I'll cover the statute. And 2226 112 A reads exactly like is in your bill, but after the colon, there's a whole series of things. Romanet I, electioneering too close to a polling place. Romanet 2, disturbing a polling place. Romanet 3, unlawful possession of alcoholic or malt beverages at a polling place. Romanet 4, accepting or expending any money or incurring any obligation on behalf of any candidate. 5, employer interfering. 6, discharging an employer because of politics. 7, causing or attempting to cause a candidate to withdraw. 8, violating WS 22-113, which is? Aha. We've got stuff flying back and forth, Senator Hutchings and everybody. Senator Boner's pointed out that 22-26-120 says if the election code does not impose a specific penalty for the willful violation of a provision prohibiting a specific act or requiring the discharge of a specific duty, whoever knowingly commits a violation or fails to discharge the duty is guilty of a misdemeanor punishable by the penalty provided by WS 22-26-112. So it's torturous, but it does circle back and get there. So I think in the end, we could remove lines 5 through 15 from the bill and still have a penalty in law about the violation that we added into E. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Boner, could I get that reference one more time? Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator Boner.
22-26-120, which refers back to 112 for some reason.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, so I think we have a motion on the table. It looks like it's workable to delete lines 5 through 15 from the bill. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That is carried. Anything else on the bill?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon and then Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I didn't know if we had to make any conforming changes on page 1. I was going to encourage that we may ask our attorneys upstairs.
So you're suggesting striking the words providing a penalty?
That is correct, and any reference to what we did on line 3, page 2 with the amendment, I don't know if that comes into play, but maybe we could have a conforming effort upstairs.
Yeah, and
If
if,
that makes sense.
why don't we put a note for our staff attorney to conform the title?
Thank you.
Is that acceptable?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. So Debbie, what we'll do is put a line alongside the title and put a question mark and say, the committee wishes the staff attorney to check on that. Anything else? All right, Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that proposed amendment that we have here before us. I believe it's from the Secretary of State's office that clarifies that that has to come from the qualified elector, not anybody else.
So
And I believe it is, it works with all the other amendments that we've made.
let's talk about that. We have a motion by Senator Boner for the Secretary of State's office. Any discussion? To me, it seems conflicting, and I'm trying to figure it out because in essence, we've modified it to say, now we're saying which claims to be an official election document. And then we're kind of tortuously adding this, and I'm not sure it's necessary, but Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So C, little c, under the same section that this E is going under, is request for a ballot may be on behalf of an absentee qualified elector if the prescribed information is furnished. Seems like it almost says the same thing without the modifying language that we added. I mean, subsequent, we've modified the language, we've amended it twice now. But if you go back to the original language of the bill and compare it to C and add this amendment into E, it's almost saying the same thing, just in a different format.
Okay. Senator Boner, any reaction to that? I'm going to make a request to Judy, if you could help us. Could you reach out to either Wendy or Anthony and ask them to come down and listen to this room? If they may not have shown up yet, but they when they get here, because I don't think anybody's ever been here at the same time that air handling system is working in it. And I'd really appreciate that. Then we've got sound technicians on that are supposed to be helping us with the acoustics in the Capitol, and they need to be here. All right, Senator Boner, you get that figured out?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Get that mic up. We're having a
Okay.
terrible time today. I'm sorry. And you're a radio guy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to track in all the amendments. Did the previous amendments delete unless requested to do so by a qualified elector on page 2? Okay, well, that's what our amendment is trying to address, is that, you know, when we're analyzing the bill, basically any qualified elector could say, okay, send X person this mailer impersonating an elected official now with the amendment added in. So that's what we're trying to clarify, that Bob can't say, send it to Jane, you know, it has to be that person themselves that requests it. That's what we were trying to clarify with the amendment. It was actually in a conversation with the AG that this issue was identified.
So, Mr. Secretary, we didn't take that up. We're looking at just this mailing of a absentee ballot request form, and we kind of, as a committee, came out on the side that it should be okay, as long as they don't represent that it's an official document, that we're okay with soliciting absentee ballots, as long as it doesn't appear to come from your office or our clerks. So that's where we came out. That's why I'm not sure the new amendment fits. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, how does he read right now?
It just reads, unless requested to do so by a qualified elector, no person shall distribute an absentee ballot request form by mail. Oh, I'm sorry, we have no person except the clerk, county clerks and the Secretary of State shall distribute an absentee ballot request form by mail, email, or any other means which claims to be an official election document to any qualified elector. So it actually has to be done. The only official ones can come from the clerk or your office. And I think you guys have rules about who you give them to and how it happens, and I'm good with that. Okay? Senator Boner, are you still? Give it to us one more time.
I think that technically the amendment is compatible, though I think we probably accomplished the intent with the other two amendments.
Okay.
But maybe at this point, it's something we could consider, give the sponsor a chance to discuss with the Secretary of State, and maybe it's something we can have on committee of the whole, if we feel it's still necessary. But the language has changed significantly, even those three little lines already. So.
Hi, Anthony, welcome. Welcome to the barrel.
Okay.
I can go either way, Senator Boner, if you could, if you want to pursue it. I think Senator Landon might have a different idea that he's noodling. So why don't we hear what his different idea is and then just think out loud on this. We'll come back to your motion. Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, I wanted to indicate to the Secretary and others that what our amendment did, which said, which claims to be an official election document, we struck that language to any qualified elector. I felt like we dangled there. And so I think that my amendment probably with Debbie reflected the striking of the language to any any qualified elector. But
Let's make sure. Debbie, did you have that in the original motion? When we inserted which claims to be an official election document, and then we strike to any qualified elector. So that kind of.
so that's it. Back to you,
Back
Mr.
to you.
Chairman. That's all.
Okay. Senator Boner, do you want to pursue, or you'd have to add that language back in, I think?
Yeah, no, let's hold off on this.
Okay. Any other amendments? Any other amendments? Can we get a roll call on the bill?
Senator Barlow? No. Senator Boner?
Aye.
Senator Landon?
Aye.
Senator Scott? Mr. Chairman?
Aye. So I think we have 4 ayes and 1 no. Okay. The next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
Really, you guys worked that pretty well, and I really, really appreciate it. Your hard work, all of you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. We like working with you too. Okay, the next one is Senate File 153, Election Security. This is Senator Boner. Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to inform the committee and yourself as chairman and the audience that I have a bill that's going to be up in another committee in probably the next 45 minutes. And I just will, when they summons me, I'm going to stand up and depart if that's acceptable, Mr. Chairman.
That's absolutely acceptable. I'm not sure that people heard that, but Senator Barlow may have to exit to present a bill. Yeah, he might be angry, but he's going to go present a bill. All right, Senator Boner, we're to you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, it's good to be here. bright and early here. So we have Senate File 153. This is entitled Election Security. This bill has been closely worked with our county clerks, has a lot of their input. And I just want to start off by saying that our county clerks do an excellent job administering our elections. I have no doubt that our elections are secure and accurate. However, I'm running this bill because there's a lot of perceptions out there that maybe there's some improvements that can be made, and that's an important part of any professional group of professionals. I think they always look for ways to evolve and build off their current success, and of course, our county clerks certainly fall into that category of being a highly capable professionals. And so, working with them, we came up with this bill that will address, I think, many concerns that folks have with our elections. And it's sort of like ethics, I would say. Elections are like ethics. It's not enough to simply avoid a conflict of interest. You need to be aware of the appearance of a conflict of interest. I just think our national discussion especially has led to a lot of questioning about our election administration. And so we worked hard to come up with a bill that will address some of those concerns and make sure that we are on solid footing moving forward. So that's the idea behind the bill, Mr. Chairman. It's just kind of the old Missile guy looking at the clerks and saying, hey, I remember those procedures. Those are a lot of the same procedures we had dealing with our nuclear weapons. And so we are able to work together to come up with this bill that most of it is putting current practices into statute, but there's also a few changes. I'll be sure to identify those, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that sounds great. And can I do a little housekeeping? Anthony, I wasn't going to make you sit here the whole meeting. We just wanted to give you a flavor for the struggles that we're having with sound. So, and you can go anytime. I'm very grateful that you came down. And thank you, Judy. Back to you, Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll just go through the bill and some of the provisions. The first provision is I should also say that our Secretary of State has had his input in this bill as well. And last I checked, he is in support, but he'll certainly speak for himself. So, first provision here is a post-election ballot audit. Now, this is putting in statute a procedure that the clerks went ahead and did this past several elections. I think the first time they piloted it was in some special elections in 2019. And then they did it through both elections, 2021. Then they did it through both elections in 2022. And so basically what this is they take what is called a statistically significant sample size, and this is based off of how close the race is. So the whole goal of this ballot audit is to identify any potential issues and fix them before the canvassing board. So it's not meant to be an exhaustive audit of all the ballots or anything like that. It's simply focused on if there's a problem, we should probably identify it before we certify the results. That's why you'll see language that limits it so we can do it in a timely time frame so that you can, like I said, the whole goal is to identify and fix any issues before the canvassing board. So the number of ballots that you audit is based off how close the race is. The closer the race, the more you audit, and the statistically significant language is meant from that perspective. What's the likelihood of that race being, the results being changed based off of any mistakes you may identify? And so this is basically encapsulating a procedure that the clerks have successfully administered in at least 2 elections, the primary and the general election. That's why you'll see language that, for example, on page 2, line 12, that limits the number of ballots. Like I said, we have to strike that balance between actually doing the audit in a meaningful way and getting it done in a timely manner. So that's that provision on page 2. Like I said, it's encapsulating what had been in rule before into statute. The next provision is an air gap. Now, this is important in any sort of cybersecurity, making sure that any machines that are used to count the ballots are not connected to the internet in any way. Like I said, this is a current practice. We're making sure that we're kind of consolidating those gains and putting that requirement into statute. The most significant changes on page 4, which will change the early voting period from everybody not covered by the federal law from 45 days to 28 days. Once again, this has been closely coordinated with the clerks. So the original idea was to be 21 days. However, we learned that sometimes it takes a while for the mail to get from one place to the other, especially in Fremont County, Mr. Chairman. And so that's
Well,
why
it's too much snow, Senator Bonner.
yeah, apparently that's the thing now. Hopefully not in August, though, but we'll
You'd
see
be
what happens.
surprised.
But so that's why we changed it to 28 days. That's after coordination with the Clerks Association. And so,
Senator Bonner, I want to ask you a question about this section because our attorneys suggested a change to line 5 and the reference, the USC reference. Did they do that to you? Did you see that?
I did not see that, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
I think it's on my desk and I'll need to slip up there and get it. Apparently, the federal reference is not quite right, according to one of our attorneys. So I'll get that and we'll straighten that out with you, but keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate that input, absolutely. But obviously, the Uniform and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act applies to members of the military, folks who are overseas. Maybe they're working for the State Department, maybe they're on a mission for their church, so don't want to interfere with their right to vote, even if it wasn't against the federal law. But in discussing with the clerk, the only reason why we have that 45 days for everyone is simply because that's the federal requirement. So there's no real reason to keep it that long. And so if we could consolidate that time frame, 28 days is still plenty of time. And certainly representing a rural area, I don't want to make that too stringent. I know that many of my constituents, especially in the ranching community, depend upon absentee voting to vote. And so I don't want to make it too stringent, but I think that'll go a long way in addressing some of the concerns as well. We'll see some conforming amendments with an air gap on page 4. Next provision, once again, this is current practice when it comes to returning the ballots from a polling place to the clerk's office. This requires an election judge or law enforcement officer to transport the ballots. It also requires a seal, a numbered seal, on the ballot box to ensure that that box was not tampered with in transit. Once again, this is something that we're very used to in the Air Force. It had slightly different methods of making sure that there was no tamper detection on sensitive components, and also recognizing that the most sensitive point when you're carrying, say, classified information or ballots is when you're in transit. It's always the most vulnerable point. So we want to make sure that we're covered there. Once again, this is a current practice. And finally, Senators, the last one is just $100,000 for the clerks for ongoing professional development, or they can get a consultant if they want, recognizing once again that this is an evolving discussion and there's always those best practices out there, and they take their job seriously. And so let's go ahead and give them some extra funds to continue to that professional development. So Senators, that's the bill. The clerks do have an amendment, which I'm sure they can explain. But with that, I'll yield to any questions.
Okay, Senator Bonner, thank you. Questions? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Senator Bonner. So on page 2 of the bill, we have a calculation that gives us smallest observable percentage. And then, if I understand it correctly, that is used to determine the statistically significant sample size. Is that accurate? I just want to make sure that that's what we're doing, going from smallest observable percentage to sample size, and that we're not using smallest observable percentage as the statistically significant sample size. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I had the same question. Just to kind of drill down on that one, Senator Bonner, can you?
Okay, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? And speak into the microphone, please.
Go ahead, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is smallest observable percentage is that the same as statistically significant sample size, or is it used to determine? I just want to know. Just want to make sure that we're not using, one is not equivalent to the other, and we're actually making that calculation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Bonner.
Right, thank you, Senator Landon. So yeah, you're using that percentage to determine the sample size. And so the closer the race, the larger the sample size. And I'm not a statistician, but you want within a certain percent of certainty that race is being called accurately. And so, yes, the closer the race, the larger the sample size. And that's a subject of an amendment from the clerks as well.
Okay, appreciate that heads up, Senator Bonner. I'm just trying to get arms around how to explain this to constituents. And given the hand-wringing that we've had, is that sample size going to be adequate? Can you speak to that and how you arrived at the language in paragraph A?
Yes,
That
Mr.
would
Chair.
help me.
Yeah, and once again, the focus of doing the ballot audit is to identify problems before the canvassing board. Without drawing out the election like they do in Arizona, there's a balance between doing the audit and getting it done in a time frame that is meaningful and we have actual results and not carrying the election on forever. And so that's a balance that we struck here. And if folks are still concerned, I point out that this does not preclude a more thorough audit later necessarily. The focus here is identifying any problems and fixing them before the canvassing board. So it's limited in scope for that reason. And like I said, but it's a balance. I mean, if you just, not to get into something that isn't necessarily directly related, but is tangentially related, but in my opinion, if you just do audit after audit after audit, the election never ends. And to what's the point if you can't change the results? And so, but that gets into a little bit different discussion that isn't necessarily contemplated with this bill. But if there's a broader concern, I think I want to make that distinction that this is meant to identify and solve issues if there are any before you certify the results.
Senator, given the climate, I fully expect this to be challenged too, but we can talk about that later on. Any other questions for Senator Boner? Sponsor, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the question is in that section, it's the results in that county, is it not? Not the statewide results?
Senator, go ahead.
Yes, it's by county, but for statewide candidates. And so I assume that helps with the sample size. But yeah, so for statewide candidates, but within the county. So the clerks are the ones doing this work.
Okay. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was going to actually ask that question of the clerks when Ms. Langford. So this actually doesn't apply to pre-county canvassing board for local elections. This is only for statewide or legislative races, the way I understand the way this is applied. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, go ahead.
Yes, it's for the statewide races.
Okay. All right. Senator Boner, thank you. Let's go on to our county clerks, and Ms. Langford, look forward to your thoughts on this bill. I understand you have an amendment suggestion for us. We're being handed the proposed amendment from our attorneys upstairs that was referenced earlier, by the way. And so take it away, Ms. Langford. Good morning again.
Good morning, Senator. I'm Mary Langford, representing the county clerks. My purpose today here is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections and particularly election security. The County Clerks Association would like to express its gratitude to Senator Boner for working so closely with the county clerks prior to filing this bill. Your effort was really appreciated. Thank you, sir. I want to go back just a little bit and talk about the post-election audit that was just visited. This was a new procedure that was brought in. It was tested in the 2021 elections.
Sorry, Ms. Langford.
It's hard.
It is so
that better?
hard today.
It is hard, and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Right, please, yeah, thanks.
Get it right
Okay.
up tight.
So the post-election audit was performed on both the primary and the general elections in 2022. And as was explained by the senator, this is a test that's done after the election, basically to determine if what was voted on the ballot is actually what was reported. And that procedure was set up in conjunction with the University of Wyoming with a statistician. Those sample sizes were determined through that partnership with them. Election Director Shai Cohn worked closely with the University of Wyoming Math and Statistics Department to develop the formula that determined what a statistically significant sample size was. And as such, we would like to continue that partnership. The purpose is determining the method of what is statistically significant sample size. So as was explained, the percentage gives you the number, then that number of ballots are tested. And happy to report both of those election tests that were done statewide, no issues were discovered, there were no problems. So the post-election audit function here to be codified is really important for the clerks. It continues to support our election integrity and support our election equipment. The codification of the air gap has been there in the 2020 election equipment. This just codifies that it's there, there's no connection to the internet and that type of thing. We support that. The 28 days to reduce the absentee voting. Actually, the national average of days for early voting is 23, so 28 is something that makes sense, and that's reported by the National Conference of State Legislators. Not only does the sound not work, my mouth doesn't work today either. I'm struggling, I'm sorry. And as you know, UOCAVA continues to be supported or required by federal requirements, and that's the 45 days. So those ballots will continue to go out 45 days. We'll go to 28 days in the state. The last piece of this legislation is the codification and uniformity on how ballots and results are delivered to the county clerks and how they're handled. The use of election judges and peace officers, the locking of containers, the use of numbers, and the monitoring of those numbers and those collections is part of that. And then the last piece is the funding. We appreciate the funding to be able to continue to use our elections, and that, of course, is policy decision on your part. County clerks support this legislation, and we're ready to stand for any questions, and I'm happy to try to clarify any questions that you had earlier. We do have an amendment that we'd like to propose, and again, just to clarify the post-election audit formula, on page 2, line 7, before each, insert using a formula developed each election cycle by the University of Wyoming Department of Mathematics and Statistics.
Hold on.
Page 2, line 7.
Okay. Using a formula developed each election cycle by the University of Wyoming's
Department of Mathematics and Statistics.
Wow,
That's awesome.
that is so good. Thank you. I can just feel a little better. Okay, using a formula developed each election cycle by the University of Wyoming's Department of Mathematics and Statistics. Okay.
And your staff has a copy of this amendment too, sir.
Okay.
Then again, on page 5, line 12, after capital B, insert and acting under the authority of the county clerk. So this has to do with the election judges and the peace officers coming to the counting center with ballots and election materials.
Okay. Insert line 12 after the capital B in parentheses, and acting under the authority of the county clerk.
Yes, sir.
Okay, keep going. Any more?
That's it, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Questions for the county clerks? Any questions for the clerk? Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman,
I can't tell you how much better this feels here. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Scott.
Angels humming.
Mr. Chairman, the audit, once you've gotten the sample size, the audit will cover all the offices on the ballot, will they not? Pick up a problem with the ballots, it would you'd be able to use that in all the offices, not just the statewide, would you not?
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman,
Langford.
Senator Scott, yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
that being the case, I think, and I'd suggest to clerks that on page 2, line 4, received the most votes, add the words "within the county." So there isn't confusion over that particular issue.
Line 4 after the word votes.
Yeah.
On page 2.
Is that because the county clerks only have authority within their county?
Mr. Chairman, otherwise I think there is confusion over, does the formula cover the statewide setting a percentage for all the counties at once, or is it a unique formula for each county? And I think it's a unique formula for each county.
Mr. Chairman,
Formula is-
Senator,
but the
that's
numbers
correct.
will be unique.
Ms. Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, that's correct. It's unique for each county.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think it needs that addition just to be sure that that's what happens.
I understand, Senator Scott. Thank you. All right. Senator Landon.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Ms. Langford, this does not preclude anyone from demanding a complete recount, does it? How does that work? I'm sure this will help, but frankly, again, given the times we're in, I just fully expect we'll have counties that will demand a complete recount, right? And how
Mr.
does that
Chairman,
work?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Ms.
Lang.
Langford. I'm going to get you, dear, honestly. I promise. To you.
It does not preclude recounts. So there are automatic recounts based on being within 1% of the vote. If the vote's that close, that's automatic. However, a candidate or anyone else can request a recount. There's a fee, and it has to be requested within a certain amount of time after the election to be able to perform the work. This post-election audit is to make sure that what was on the ballot is what is reported, as opposed to a recount is basically a replication of election day, a rerun of the ballots through the equipment, and a tabulation to make sure that the numbers are the same at the end.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Any follow-up?
Just one quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the air gap language, just to be clear, there was nothing ever hooked up to the internet, correct? All this does is just reflect what has already been going on. Do I
Ms.
have that
Langford.
correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, absolutely. There has been no equipment in Wyoming attached to the internet. And the 2020 election equipment that was purchased by the state that's owned by all of the counties, there is no internet connection.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that what Senator Scott brought up about the per county thing is important, at least for clarification in my mind. But I don't know that this new section, this is new sectional law, actually talks about which contests are audited under this section. And I'm referring to line 9 and 10. For each contest audited under this section, and I look at all the new language under this section, I do not see a list or any indication of, are we auditing every contest? Are we auditing only the statewide contests? The statewide contests, Mr. Chairman, are being used to determine that percentage and then the statistically significant number or sample size. But I do not see anything in this that says which ballots, which contests are being audited under this section. If it's everything, then I think we ought to say that. If it's ones within a certain percentage, I think we ought to say that. But I don't know, the way this is written, Mr. Chairman, I don't understand which ones we're actually auditing. I understand how we get to the number we want to use to audit, but I don't know which ones are actually auditing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Scott, on that.
My question, the county clerks, on that one, are we not auditing the ballots in the system, and it should pick up a problem on any of the contents. So it's
Okay.
not specifically auditing contests, it's auditing the system and auditing the ballots.
Well, that ought to be clear.
Let's hear, Ms. Langford, you want to tackle that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I believe so.
Senator Bonner, you got anything you might want to add on that?
Yeah, it's my understanding that they did this is based off a procedure they accomplished in the last election. So my understanding they did it for the statewide offices only. And so if that needs clarified, we can certainly add that in. The way I interpret it now, the clerk it'd be up to the individual clerk whether they just do the statewide or if they want to keep on going down the ballot. So.
Senator Barlow?
Mr. Chairman, and I think I understand what we're trying to say. I'm just not sure that the language on lines 9 and 10 say that, because it says, for each contest audited under this section, which is different than what Senator Scott said, which was for the ballots
All about it.
voted under this, in that election or something like that. So I think if we're doing it on the total number of ballots, great. But if we're doing it on a per or each contest format, I just need to understand what's getting audited so everybody's clear about what we're auditing and on what basis. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any response? Want to think about it?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I think maybe something after election on line 7, we could add a sentence that says the audit shall consist of statewide races or something to that effect. It's my understanding that's what was accomplished this last election. Or it could be a policy decision. We could make it up to the clerk. We could say you shall only do statewide races. I think as it stands now, it lends to the clerk's decisions as to what races they audit. But we can clarify that for sure.
Okay, so we'll let you think about it while we're working this bill, if that's all right. Ms. Langford?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's a policy decision here. If we want to check just the statewide races, it should say that. If we want to go down the ballot, it should say that.
Understand. Okay, we'll look for an amendment in this area when we get to work in the bill. Anything else from the clerks? Let's hear from the Secretary of State's office. Okay, you're welcome. Mr. Secretary, how are you today?
Good, how are you doing?
We're good, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and we also have our Deputy Secretary of State, Jesse Naaman, to my right, and to my left is our General Counsel Policy Director, Joe Rubino. We stand in support of Senate File 153, which codifies a number of practices and then has that change there in the middle, which I think is very important to protecting our elections. Election integrity and security is my number one priority, and this bill does several things that will strengthen both the integrity of Wyoming's elections as well as the public's confidence in our elections. So first, this bill, as we've talked about, codifies that post-election audit that was done in the primary and the general. I think the discussion about the amendments in terms of the later discussion, I think was very positive, that clarification on what races are going to be counted, because it is a little vague in that respect. I mean, how you determine the amount to audit is clear, and that's based on the statewide count. But what exactly is audited, it would be good to bring some clarification there. I think this other amendment from the clerks, appreciate their efforts on this bill and their support of this bill. This amendment, I do have some concerns on specifically identifying the university, not that we don't want to partner with them on this, but is that going to go in perpetuity? I think there's a professor there that has taken an interest in this, but what happens once he leaves? I mean, we make this reference forever. I think we could do that via rule and just practice and determine what exactly we're going to partner with. Second, I think codifying air gap practice is very positive. This is an important codification of existing practice, which Wyoming would do well to memorialize in statute. Third, this bill shortens the early voting period from 45 to 28 days. I think a very important change, as Ms. Langford was saying, would put us more closer to the average of where states are at, and we'd still be the 12th longest in the United States, but we wouldn't be basically close to the longest. And I think that's a positive change. And then codifying the transporting of ballots and those procedures for chain of custody is very positive as well. So we support this bill, all five concepts, the fifth concept being that appropriation. It's a small appropriation for some professional development, which I think the clerks, have said they would be very helpful for their continued professional development. So we stand for questions, and we're very supportive of this bill.
Thank you very much. I can do a little housekeeping. Madam Chief Clerk, welcome. You missed it when the air handling system is on. We're doing a lot better now, but when it was blowing air, we couldn't hear a thing in here. I mean, it was terrible. I think we all agree, right? Raise your hand if it was bad. There you go. So, but it went off, and it'll probably come on again because it's so cold outside. But anyway, we're getting along. Okay, committee questions for Mr. Secretary and his staff? Anything? Mr. Secretary, can I ask about, apparently a former staff member worked with the university to accomplish some of this, and how's that going to be handled going forward?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think we haven't gotten the exact parameters of how we're going to do this yet. I mean, we're 30 days in, but we plan on conducting this audit and like that it would be codified. So, I mean, we look forward to that codification, and we were planning on doing it anyway. That was my intent.
So I would imagine someone from your staff will be working with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, sir. Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for the caution on the university. The only thing that comes to my mind is, I don't know if I'd feel very good about it coming from somewhere else. You know what I mean? I think my constituents would feel pretty comfortable with our own university providing us with statistical numbers that we're going to take a look at these elections, and then it's us. But I can just say, I just can see someone criticizing, well, the secretary went off to Washington, D.C. and found a firm, and they decided that. So any thoughts on that? I mean, if we don't call out our own university, it just kind of opens the door for that, don't you think?
Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Lannon, good point. I think I certainly believe in using the university, partnering with the university on initiatives. I guess there's two things. I mean, one, is it going to be exclusive? I mean, are there other folks that could weigh in? I like getting feedback from a variety of sources, not exclusively any source. But then the second thing is, what happens if the university doesn't want to conduct this anymore? I mean, if that professor leaves and they don't have the capability or they don't want to, I mean, I guess there's no penalty here, but I mean, it's a violation of state statute. I'm sure if we brought them in, they'd probably say that they have the capability now and they're okay with it, because I think there's a professor there who's taken an interest in this and likes being a part of it. But, this does go on, it's perpetual. So that's my concern.
Yeah.
But
Thank you.
I think, Mr. Secretary, it could always be the university, but not necessarily the Department of Mathematics and Statistics, or they could change their name, Math and statistics used to be separate departments when I was there. So
and
we
Mr.
might not want to be so specific. We'll think about that. Senator Scott,
If we just had a relevant department at the University of Wyoming.
perhaps. Anything else for Mr. Secretary? Thank you very much. Anybody in the audience like to testify? Mr. Winnie. Thanks for coming, you guys.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. As a side note on the noise in the room, I'd like to relate an experience I had. Air handling systems commonly have metering flow diaphragms in them that have various size orifices in that. And during overhaul of a submarine I was stationed on, the noise background in the wardroom was equally onerous as to what you had here.
Yes.
We complained to the shipyard. They moved the diaphragm 6 inches down the pipe, noise went away.
Wow.
I don't know whether that would apply here or not, but that's a data point for you.
Are you available for consultation?
I am available for consultation, but I am not a contractor.
Might need an evaluation of our diaphragm, it sounds like.
Well, thank you. There's got to be a way to make it quieter. Well, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Along the way of my career, I served as a Chief of Command and Control at U.S. Strategic Command, and later was on a blue ribbon task group that was called in to look at some processes inside the National Security Agency, that big glass building northeast of Washington, D.C. Along the way of the report we generated, we talked about air gaps because they were looking at putting in an entire building link up. This is circa 1997. And we recommended they have an air gap for certain key systems, such as you're talking here. They got kind of mad at us for doing that, but it turned out a couple of years later to have been a very good thing to have recommended. But there's more to an air gap than just an air gap. You need to have physical security or other design features of the hardware. For instance, if the equipment has a USB port in it, somebody could secrete a thumb drive. Here's a thumb drive. Not very hard to secrete in, do something, change the software, take your pick. Lots of things they could do. So that physical security of it or design of the equipment to prevent alteration of the software is also important. Another element of software is you need to periodically, excuse me, go look at the software. When you have 10, 20,000 lines of code, a code developer can secrete things inside the code that you don't know is there. In the realm of nuclear weapons in the military, when you have software for missiles and so on, you're required to have an independent software nuclear safety analysis done. It's a budgeted line item on nuclear weapons program. It has to be a completely independent contractor, and he goes through the software line by line. That's not cheap. Some years ago, it was $80 to $100 per software line of code. Nevertheless, it's something for you all to consider. And lastly, I would offer you the thought that as you generate ballots, you look at putting a barcode on a ballot so that a ballot is uniquely identified and easily identified to a particular voter, and so you don't get into that issue of extra ballots. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Senator Landon, Senator Scott? I heard a groan down there.
Mr. Chairman, I think we would be very unwise to do that because then you've created a system that can destroy the secrecy of the ballot. You don't want to get back identifying ballots with individual voters. That can, and I've heard of instances where it has been abused when systems were such in the past in other states.
Mr. Winnie?
Just a thought, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Any other questions for Mr. Winnie? Thanks so much. We always appreciate your help. Ms. Lowe? Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and esteemed committee members. My name is Jen Lowe. I'm the Executive Director at the Equality State Policy Center. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for fair elections and transparent government. The ESPC has no position on this bill. It seems to just codify what is already current practice, and we do support our 23 county clerks. Wyoming's elections are safe and secure, and we do not think that anybody has questioned their integrity. We also appreciate your professional development consideration for the clerks, considering we do feel there will be considerable work for them and their teams in the coming year as they address the new bills that pass through the legislature this session. Thank you. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Lowe? Thank you very much. Who else would like to address the committee? Ms. Simmons, welcome.
Good morning. Gail Simmons, Civics 307. I am a nonpartisan civics wonk on the legislature, and I have an additional one on election participation. I deeply regret that the necessity to codify existing practices are driven by inaccurate and unsubstantiated campaign record that in turn has driven decreased confidence in Wyoming elections integrity. By the way, I am in support of the bill. Recent election audits resulted in findings of 100% accuracy in 100% of the audits. The 28 days still provides sufficient time for voters to make informed decisions after the campaign season heats up. So I'm fine with the 28 days. I would like to point out that actual and early absentee voting in 2020 primary, it was 47% or 65,000. In the general, 52% or 143,000, which was pandemic driven. However, in 2022, it only decreased to 34% in the primary and 37% in the general, and 2/3 of those are Republicans. I also want to point out on those 28 days, because I'm a little disjointed here, is that there are resource constraints on the county clerk's elections offices that really impact their being able to run the early polling places. So again, in support of the 28 days. And then finally, I would like to say that statistical theory does not appear to have changed much to impact the accuracy and capability of the University of Wyoming since I took a statistics class in the late 1970s. And I stand for questions.
We could have been in the same class. But you're much younger than me. Anybody, any questions for Ms. Simmons? Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Who else would like to address the committee? Who else would like to address the committee? Not seeing anybody. Is there anybody online? Let's let them in and. We can't hear you, but we assume you're doing the right thing.
Oh, sure. Ms. Aguiar, if you would turn on your camera. There we go.
Hello, Ms. Agner, am I saying it that right?
Yeah, Dr. Aguiar. I am in support of this bill, but I do believe you need to be pretty careful. Oh, Mr. Chairman, good morning.
Good morning.
It's cold here too in Thermopolis. Minus
bet.
41 this morning.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm still dressed warm, so sorry about what I'm wearing. I am in support of this bill, but I think there's a lot of confusion, or I just think you might want to take a hard look at the section. Oh, geez. Good morning to me. 22-6 130 post-election ballot audit under number letter A, line 7 through 13.
Go ahead.
I for over a decade, I taught graduate level statistics, and I'm going to try to simplify this. I don't want to get into the weeds with this or anything, but I think there's some confusion here. I'm sure that the statistician at the University of Wyoming gave you correct information, but I'm not sure that whoever wrote this actually wrote it in the way that they were telling you. There's two different things here in those lines. There's sample size, that's number one. And number two, there's statistical significance. 5% is probably statistical significance. And you might want to clear this up with the University of Wyoming Department of Math. Sample size is going to vary depending upon the county. And to say it shall not exceed 5% of the total number of ballots cast is not going to work. That was probably statistical significance. Sample size will vary per county. For example, 10% is a good sample size. 5% is maybe a good sample size, for example, if you had 100,000 and you wanted people, or ballots cast, excuse me, 5,000 is too much, all right? It should always be at least 1,000. But if let's say there's only 1,000 people, then 5% is only 50, and that is not going to reach your 5% statistical significance. Okay, I did not want to go too far in the weeds with this, but I do think that those lines, maybe just a quick talk with the University of Wyoming and just kind of switch your wording around and clarify that with them. I don't want to get in between you and them because I'm sure this makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. And you will not reach statistical significance in
Okay, thank
many
you.
counties in Wyoming. That's just my input.
So let's see.
Questions?
Great. We're going to run it by the committee and see if we have any questions. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think the approach being taken here is a little more of a Bayesian approach, is it not? And then I think you can get to what percentage might change the be statistically significant. You're looking at what's it take to change the result and doing it on a county basis. So I think this is probably correctly worded, Mr. Chairman.
We'll go back to you, ma'am. He's suggesting this is more of a Bayesian analysis, and I don't think I've said that word in a long time. Senator Scott, you always impress me. Back to you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, no, it probably is not correctly worded. I think it's going to confuse the clerks. I do like the line that I do think each clerk shall use the smallest observable percentage. That part's fine because that would get them the correct sample size and then get them to the 0.05% statistically significant. And that's what probably the 0.05 was. But to tell them they never have to go over 5%, if the county with 1,000 people only audited 50 of them, that's not even close to 5%. That's like 0.25 or something like that, which is not even remotely statistically significant. If you remember, any part of your statistics classes, basic statistics.
I'll tell you what, ma'am, we really appreciate this, and we'll dig into a little more. We're grateful that you clued us in on this. Appreciate you looking at it.
Thank you.
Other,
Just a little tweaking.
yeah, any other questions? Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Do we have another person in the room?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I apologize, my camera is broken. This is Julie Freese, Fremont County Clerk, testifying for the County Clerks Association and the Fremont County Clerk's Office. I just wanted to go over the actual audit that we did and see if this helps out a little bit. So first of all, the reasons that all this language is in here is that Secretary Buchanan came to us and said, let's help the people understand that the ballots are being counted as they're being voted, as Mary has explained to you that process. And so we worked with him on that, and he said, if we use the statewide races, the top statewide races, those would be the ones that are kind of at issue this year. So that's what we did. And we actually tested it out in 21. A lot of us went to the counties that had elections. And as Ms. Simmons said, the percentage of accuracy was 100% on both the primary and the general election. This gives the Secretary of State the ability to look statewide or at legislative races. It allows us, if we don't put something in there, it allows us at the county level, let's say we had a close race and we want to, we can use the same ballots that was sent to us potentially, and we could look up a commissioner's race, for example. So I'm not sure that we want to put in specifically which races we want to do. And the other thing that you have to be very careful on is, so let's say we use a House district and then we pull out ballots that statistically it brings up these ballots. We have instructions that says if the race is too close, if there are too many areas, too many parts of that district that are split, and we are going to potentially know how people voted, we are not to use it when it comes in. So I think for a while we are working on how this whole process is working, which I thought it worked pretty well for the primary in general. I'm not sure I would change a lot with what we had started with the Secretary of State's office, because I think it was a good start to what we were doing. And I still think we need to work on it a little bit more, but leave it open for us to use it how we want to.
Thank you, Ms. Freese. Questions for Ms. Freese? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we were discussing with Clerk Langford here, perhaps we could achieve that goal by on, page 2, line 7 after election, inserting the audit shall consist of the statewide races and may include more races at the clerk's discretion. Would that provide sufficient flexibility while still providing direction to you?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, I think that is good, but I would also add in the Secretary of State in case he wanted to add legislative races.
Sounds like a good idea. Okay, any other questions for my county clerk? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest 2 amendments and want to try them out on her. One is just adding the words on line 4 of page 2, within the county, so that we know that we're talking about the votes within the county and not some other area. And the other one is to go in and on lines 9, strike for each contest and insert to be, so it's a sample size of ballots to be audited. And I think that gives them some flexibility, particularly when combined with the amendment Senator Boner was talking about. I think that gives them the appropriate level of flexibility in what we're talking about.
Okay. Ms. Freese, did you catch that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I'm going to yield to Mary. I don't have the most up-to-date bill here in front of me, so if she could potentially answer that for us, since she's been following that bill. So I don't make a mistake and say that sounds great and then it doesn't. So.
Okay, sounds good. Any other questions for Clerk Freese? We're good. Thanks, Ms. Freese. Always good to have you. Anybody else online? One more online.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Walt Tanner from Casper. I'm in House District 57. I would just like to say that I was listening to the discussion about the amendment earlier and using the University of Wyoming to figure out how to do these auditing statistics. And I have to say that I think that that is a much better plan than what the secretary suggested in leaving it up to his discretion. Just because I feel that if someone were to have a stake in the election and then also have the discretion to figure out who creates these audits, it could create the appearance of impropriety, if not impropriety itself. I also think that the university is the best way to go because the university is mandated in our state constitution. And so it will be there as long as the state of Wyoming is here. And I suggest that you reach out to the university to figure out exactly how you should word it so that they have a group of people there that are ready to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And what'd you say your name was, sir?
Walt Tanner, WaltTanner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanner. Questions for Mr. Tanner? Thank you very much for your testimony today. Anybody else? Anybody else in the room? Committee, I don't see anybody else. What's your pleasure on the bill?
Move the bill.
Got a motion by Landon. Any amendments? Start with you, Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I'll try out the technical correction first from staff.
You bet. I handed this out. It came from our attorneys. It changes the reference there, and Lucas Plum gave that to me if you need to follow up. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, next up we have the county clerk's amendments, which I believe our staff has. Perhaps they could describe how that reads right now. That'd be helpful. So I gave mine to Mr. Secretary, I think. So.
Debbie, do you have that, or Judy's bringing it over? Here, Senator Boner, I'll let you do that one.
Okay, so page 2, line 7, insert after, or before each, insert, using a formula developed each election cycle by the relevant department at the University of Wyoming. And then also on page 5, line 12, after B, insert acting under the authority of the county clerk.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's carried. Anything else, Senator Boner?
Yes?
Who else had amendments?
Well, let Charlie do it.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, two of them, page 2, line 4, after votes, insert the words within the county. And on page 2, line 9, delete before each county and insert the words to be. So it read ballots to be audited.
I kind of missed something there, Senator Scott. Yeah,
To each contest.
I missed the second part. I'm trying.
Okay.
I think maybe I
Ballot.
was on the wrong line.
Page 2, line 9, after ballots,
Okay,
delete for each county,
it's
for
contest.
contest,
That's what was throwing me off.
for each contest, and insert the words to be. Because that's what they're doing, Mr. Chairman, is auditing.
Okay.
And I think the clerks approve.
So both parts of that amendment are on the tables. Senator Barlow,
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the first part of the amendment.
want to divide it? You don't have to. Go ahead, just
I
speak.
think this will be friendly.
Okay.
So I think that the way it's being placed now, it would maybe only apply to the statewide candidates receiving the most and not the second highest. So I think it may be better placed, the same language on line 5 after the word contest, for each contest within the county. That way it qualifies both the highest and the second highest as within the county. Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman, I think that's right.
I think so too. So that's friendly. So we have a motion on the table that now says line 5 after the word contest within the county. And then down on line 9, strike the words for each contest and substitute to be. I could say or not to be. I was really tempted, but I didn't do it. Okay, understand it? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Any other? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, line 7, after election, insert the following language. And with maybe a little bit of discretion of staff to make sure it conforms with our standard drafting procedure, but something along the lines of the audit shall consist of statewide races and may include additional races at the discretion of the clerks or the Secretary of State.
Okay. Just to be clear, Senator Boner, that there was on line 7, we were talking about inserting the words University of Wyoming in a previous amendment. Of course, we're not doing that at this point, but would you read yours again?
Okay, so page 2, line 7, after election.
After the period, actually, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, it's
So
a new sentence.
New sentence. The audit shall consist of statewide races and may include additional races at the discretion of the county clerk or the Secretary of State.
Okay. Discussion, Senator Landon.
Just for edification here, does that appear, Senator, after the word election and before the previous amendment that we just adopted? Then we, after this one, we would go into using a formula developed?
We haven't done the using a formula yet. I don't think.
We did.
Oh, we did? I'm sorry.
We did.
I always want to straighten out the chairman. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, it would be after, oh, go ahead. It would be after that.
Yeah.
amendment, I
It's a
believe.
new sentence after.
After the amendment.
Okay, after the previous amendment. Okay,
All right, thanks
for that clarification.
And thanks for straightening me out. Further discussion, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the discretion is the correct word for a county clerk to decide there's some issue within their own county. I don't know that it is the same for the Secretary of State. That would be a request, because they are not the election administrator for the county. They are the statewide election. So I mean, discretion is, I think that's a specific word to someone who has an authority within a defined thing. I don't know that the Secretary of State we have granted that kind of discretion into a county's administrating their elections. Maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Chairman, and I don't have
I think it's a good point.
50 or 80 years of experience that is on this end of the table, but and well-regarded experience, I might add. But I just want to be clear that discretion might describe the county clerk, but I don't know that it accurately authorizes or reflects what we'd want.
Do you have a better word as a friendly amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I would say requested, because then that says the Secretary, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, requested by the Secretary of State and implemented at the discretion or something of the county clerk, because they would have the discretion to say, yeah, there's really a problem here or there is not. And otherwise, we have a statewide official coming into in a local election office and saying, nope, this is the way we got to do it. And I just think that's something we want to, I don't know that I have the right language, but you see what I'm trying to get to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bono, you got any ideas?
And so perhaps for now, we could just keep it at the county clerks, recognize that, of course, the Secretary of State could always request additional work from them. And so if it's a friendly amendment, if we just keep it to the clerks from now, and we can go ahead and.
I like that too.
Yeah, go ahead and make
Okay.
an assessment if we want to make something different later.
All right, so we're not going to have Secretary of State in that particular amendment. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Anything else on the bill? Anything else on the bill? Debbie, would you call roll?
Senator Barlow? Senator Boner?
Aye.
Senator Landon? Senator Scott? Mr. Chairman?
Aye, bill's carried, all above. Come on up, Senator Beitman. I promised the Convention of States folks that at 9 o'clock we would start that, because that's going to be kind of a heavy lift. But don't worry, if we're not done with you by then, we will continue and hear your bill. So
Good morning.
Floor is
Mr.
yours.
Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Bo Beitman, Senate District 21, bringing in old good friend, the crossover bill. For I think this is the seventh time's the charm, for me anyways. Real short bill, obviously, is the same exact bill I ran last year, passed the Senate 18-12. Unfortunately for me, 3 of the 12 no votes are on this committee, so I understand my work is cut out for me today. But committee members, the meat of the bill is on page 2 at the bottom. It's we go into 22-5-214, declaration or change in party affiliation. Paragraph A, for a primary election, an elector may declare or change party affiliation by completing an application signed before a notarial officer or election official and filing it with the county clerk prior to the first day on which an application for nomination may be filed. And it changes it to, on paragraph B, for a general election. And then basically you can change your primary, or you can change your political affiliation up until the day before the nominating period starts, locks it out until the day after the primary election, sir. That's what the bill does. There's conforming language in there, and there's also on page 1, or page 2, I'm sorry, at the top of page 2, just closes a loophole, which prevents you from basically canceling your registration and getting around the law and re-registering. So that's all the bill does. It's a policy decision. It's a debate we've been having for years and years and years on whether or not we want to allow Democrats to vote in Republican primaries. I'm hoping that after the absolute debacle we saw this year in the primary, or last year, I guess it was 22, that maybe some minds have changed and we want to end this madness. I mean, they really did make a mockery out of our primary election process by openly and actively encouraging Democrats who have never wanted to be a Republican in their life. The only reason why they would switch is to influence the outcome of a Republican election. That goes at the heart of what integrity means. Integrity is following an ethical or moral code. And there's nothing ethical about basically cheating. And it's wrong. Just because it's legal does not make it right. We have an opportunity to right the wrong and to put it in statute, make it illegal, stop this practice of party raiding where one party gets to pick the other party's nominee. It's wrong, and I've always thought it was wrong. I'll continue to fight this fight, and if it doesn't make it through today, I'll bring it again next year. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Beitman. Questions for Senator Beitman? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Senator Beitman. Good to see you this morning. Appreciate your passion on this front, and you know, just to be as open and honest as I can be. Part of my heartburn with this is how early we have decided we may want to lock this down. And I always thought that here in Wyoming, you know, after you discover who's filed for office, it might be your neighbor, and they might be a member of a different party. And that's really my only heartburn. I totally get, you know, where you're at. Did you give any consideration to a date that's out in front of that primary election, but not quite so far, just because of that?
Senator Beitman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, yeah, my first couple cracks at this took into the consideration that aspect, but ultimately I made the decision like when you know who's on the ballot, like if you're on the other, you see this in races across the country. Georgia's had an issue with crossover voting now, and now their legislature's trying to stop it. You find out who's on the ballot, and then you run somebody, the other party would vote for the more, in this case, the more liberal Republican in the race, so that this would take that out of the equation and go back to, honestly, if you had a change of heart and you're no longer affiliated with the opposite party and you want to make that change, that's an honest change, and we don't want to prevent that from happening. That's why I picked the date before the filing. But once the names are on the ballot are known, then you draw in the people that want to maliciously change the outcome of the other party's primary. And to your example, your neighbor, you know, I have family members who are Democrats who wanted to vote for me, but they knew I was going to run before the nominating period. So they would, if you knew the person, you would know in enough time that you could change your party affiliation if you wanted to. This just gets at the people that the ends justify the means, right? So it's getting at that malicious intent they had no intention of ever being a Republican. They just wanted to play in the Republican primary to affect the outcome of that election and then switch right back and laugh about it. And it's just not right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, question is change of party affiliation. Am I right in thinking this will also be a question of the county clerks eventually? Am I right in thinking that includes change from unaffiliated to one of the parties? And Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked that question, part of my district has a disproportional number of people who move around quite a bit because they're in the oil business, and they get moved to Wyoming and will register to vote, but often not declare a party until they have their understanding of what the parties mean in this state. And then they will select a party. And I think they're going to be offended potentially by this one.
Senator Beitman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, this does take into account changing affiliation and declaring affiliation. Declaring and changing. So this does take into account both.
So an unaffiliated voter, an independent, would be covered by this and not able to become a Republican?
They would have to, Mr. Chairman, they would have to declare or change. So if they don't have a party affiliation, they would need to declare one if they wanted to vote on the Republican ballot. Same as if they were already a different party and wanted to change their party affiliation to vote on a Republican ballot or the Democrat.
So it'd be
vice versa.
affected by the same timeline?
Exactly.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions for the sponsor? Thank you.
Thank you
Let's
very
hear
much.
from Secretary of State. Would you like to address the committee? Oh, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. Senator Barlow. I apologize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, thank you, Senator Beitman. So on page 2, the top talks about written request from elector, and this is the grounds for cancellation of a registration. Mr. Chairman, I just want to know there's 5 other Romanettes above that. One is death, failure to vote, removal of residence, disqualification to vote, which would be conviction of a felony or something like that. And yet this one says, now you can't do, I would argue, any of those things within this period of time.
Can't die?
Well, that's my, Mr. Chairman, what I'm
that's
saying
cool.
is that this is at the request of the elector, but if you are not qualified to vote because of death or some other thing, there's some kind of notification that what happens, whether it's to the courts because of a conviction or something like that. So does this disqualify all the other reasons that a person's voting may change, besides written request of the elector? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Beitman.
Chairman Case, Senator Barlow, this came from this former Secretary of State Buchanan. Their office caught this as a possible loophole, brought it to my attention, wanted it in the bill for last year. This just says, because the old law said upon written request of the elector, period. Well, what if they just wanted to drop their, if this law were to pass without that in there, what if they wanted to just cancel their registration so then they could get around this, the whole intent of the law, and then re-register same day, because we allow that at the polls, and this law is meaningless. So this goes to that. You'll have to ask the Secretary of State the specifics on the first part of your question, but the genesis of that being included in this bill was to close a loophole.
Senator Barlow, anything? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's hear Mr. Secretary.
That's probably the phone.
Mr. Secretary, welcome
Mr.
again.
Chairman, the Wyoming Secretary of State, for the record, and we stand in support of SF 163. I think the time has come for us to get this done, and I feel good that this is going to get done in this session. We had a House passage of two bills on this issue here yesterday, and those are going to the floor, and obviously your action as well. So we've got three bills, sort of three vehicles in the hopper. And Senate File 163 it really curbs the problem of crossover voting in Wyoming. And as we've seen over the past several election cycles, crossover voting has undermined the sanctity of Wyoming's primary process by allowing voters to disingenuously participate in primary elections. For example, in the 2018 primary election, there were over 12,500 statewide party affiliation changes, the vast majority of which switched to vote in the Republican primary. Similar results occurred in 2022. In fact, it was amplified. According to the Wyoming Secretary of State's voter registration statewide summary on May 1st, 2022, there were 45,095 Democrats and 196,888 Republicans registered to vote in Wyoming. On September 1st, 2022, a little over 2 weeks after the primary election, the number of registered Democrats fell to about 30,000, and Republicans, by contrast, grew to 235,298. And allowing people to change their party affiliation up to the day of the primary election and then change back dilutes our primary system. It creates incentives for people who do not share party's values to nonetheless prevent voters of that party from electing a candidate that represents the party's platform by crossing over temporarily. By contrast, closing the primary allows members of each party to pick a candidate that represents the voters of that party, disincentivizing these tactics by requiring voters to affiliate before election season even starts. And so passing this bill, it strengthens both parties by allowing the parties to put forward the candidate which truly represents their members. And so for this reason, I stand in full support of Senate File 163, a bill which prevents electors from switching parties after the first day on which an application for nomination may be filed, the day before, which is 96 days before the primary election. This deadline, which is approximately 3 months before the primary, prevents voters from gaming the system by holding them to commit to a party before candidates formally declare, rather than allowing voters to wait and cross over if they want to vote for one particular candidate. Republican and Democrat states alike have wrestled with this issue, and many have come to the same conclusion as Senate File 163, that we should have this lockout date. Addressing some of the concerns that I've heard in the past, sort of preemptively on the constitutionality question. Multiple states have this. New York requires a voter to commit to a party over 4 months before a primary election. Delaware has a 4-month deadline. Kentucky has a 5-month deadline. And so thus this 3-month deadline really comports to other states that have survived constitutional scrutiny. The other concern that was raised in the bill yesterday that I kind of want to preempt here because there's a little bit of a disadvantage going first, is this HAVA exemption argument. The HAVA exemption that our state has attained is exclusive to same-day registration, not switching. So passing this bill does not threaten the HAVA exemption. And I've run that by numerous folks from past Secretary of State's offices, and that's very clear from the understanding that we have with the federal government. So I'm sure that's potentially going to be brought up later, but it's not an accurate statement in my view. A voter can switch parties and also what this does is close the loophole on cancellation of registration that we were concerned about, and that language came in the bill last year that closes that loophole. So, finally, I'll say that the people of Wyoming unequivocally want a common sense solution to the problems crossover voting has posed. In a 3-month period, I drove about 35,000 miles in the state, really focused on the election integrity issue. This is the number one thing I heard about. It's the number one priority from our administration to get this closed in this session, and I really think the time has come to do that. So we support the bill fully.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions for Mr. Secretary? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand the partisan within a primary, but this also changes the general election. So the general election, I think there's only a single ballot. There is not partisan ballots. So why the need for the change to the general election? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the requirement on the general election is just to have some lockout period on people switching back, because a lot of that happens in that period. Like you said, it is one ballot, so the key is the primary. But I think that was why, I think that's why that is a good policy to maybe curb the switching back and disincentivize that, have a little bit of a lockout on that. Not that it prevents it, it just creates a lockout on that. But you're right. I mean, it's one ballot on the general election.
Anybody else for the Secretary? Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
All right, thank you.
Just by way of telegraphing, I promised the Convention of States people who have traveled that we would take that up. So Senator Beitman, we'll take this up. The first order of business will be number 1. We might start early on Thursday. It's kind of our package. So can we get the Convention of the States people? I think they're out there. Hello, Senator. How are you? So we actually, Senator Beitman, we're going to take up the rest of his bill on Thursday. So we have this room for an hour. And so the floor is yours, but let's let your folks get in and give them a moment. You've got tall folks and short folks. And cowboy folks.
And little folks.
Come on in and find a seat. We got to warn you, if the air conditioning comes on again, it's almost intolerable in here. You can't hear, so let's hope it doesn't turn on, but we'll struggle through.
All right.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman and committee, thank you. I bring you Senate Joint Resolution number 11, Convention of States. I'll go through the bill or the resolution real quick, and then hopefully we can get some questions answered and and see if there's some people that want to speak. This is a joint resolution requesting Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the United States Constitution as specified. There's some whereases here. The framers of the Constitution of the United States empowered state legislators to be guardians of liberty against future abuses of the power of the federal government. The federal government has created crushing national debt through improper and imprudent spending. Right now, we're over $32.5 trillion. You can't even imagine that. That's $32.5 million in debt. We have to do something, and I think the states are the only ones that are going to take that up. Just for an example, if you spent $40 a second for 24 hours a day, it would take you 289 days to spend $1 billion. To spend $1 trillion in the same manner, it would take you 792 years. You can't even imagine that number. The federal government has invaded the legitimate roles of the states through the manipulative process of federal mandates, many of which are unfunded mandates. And it is the solemn duty of the states to protect the liberty of the people, particularly for the future generations, by proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States through a convention of states under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. Therefore, we're in Section 1 now, so this is the main part. Therefore, be it resolved by the members of this legislature that we hereby apply to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for the calling of a convention of several states limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States that will do these three topics: impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for federal officials and members of Congress. The third one would be, maybe for an example, we might limit the time our justices, our Supreme Court could serve. Were they there for lifetime? But back in the founding days, lifetime wasn't that long. So, maybe there ought to be a limit on that. Or maybe a limit on federal officials. Federal employees maybe of the federal government. In Section 2, the legislature of the state of Wyoming adopts the application made under Section 1 of this joint resolution expressly subject to the following reservations, understandings, and declarations. And this is important. In Section I, an application to the Congress of the United States to call a convention of several states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution confers no power to Congress other than the power to call the convention. The power of Congress to exercise the ministerial duty consists solely of the authority to name a reasonable time and place for the initial meeting of the convention. Next, Congress shall call an amendment convention of the states only upon the receipt of applications from other states that propose substantially the same purpose of what we're doing. It would take 2/3 of the legislatures of several states to get them to make the call. That would be 34 states. Currently, we're at 19 for this particular proposal. Congress does not have the power or authority to determine any rules for governing of the amendment convention. Congress does not have the power to set the number of delegates to be sent by the states, nor does it have the power to select the delegates. The power to name delegates remains exclusively with the authority of the legislature of those states. By definition, the Convention of the States to propose amendments to the United States Constitution means that the states shall only have the vote on, that states shall vote on the basis of one state, one vote, and that's how it always has been. The convention of several states to propose amendments to the Constitution convened shall be limited to the consideration of these topics specifically and no others. Also, the application is made with the express understanding that an amendment that is in any way seeks to amend, modify, or repeal any provision of the Bill of Rights shall not be authorized for the consideration in any manner. Pursuant to Article 5 of the United States Constitution, Congress can do these two options on ratifying. They can select that the legislatures of the several states shall ratify, and that'll take 3/4 of the states, or they can say that the special state ratification conventions can happen. And that has happened, I think, only once, and I thought it was on on Amendment 21, I think, that we used that. And we have it in our statutes how that would happen. And finally, the legislature of the state of Wyoming may provide further instructions to its delegates and may recall its delegates at any time for breach of duty or a violation of the instructions provided in this resolution. We, in 2017, we passed a statute that explains how our delegates are selected. And currently, in that statute, we specified that it'll be the House, each side of the House will select 3, and then the Senate would select 3, and that would be the delegates that go. And I can go into that further if you want in a bit on that statute. So that's pretty much the resolution. And at this time, Mr. Chairman, I was going to see if I could ask the President and the CEO of Convention of States Action to maybe come up and help if you have some questions.
You bet. Let's just see if anybody's got any questions just for you, though. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I just get the statutory reference to the 2017 law that we enacted? I apologize.
It was Bill number 50 in 2017, and I have it right here if you would like me to go through some of the particulars.
Mr. Chairman,
Just the
just the
number.
reference, just the WS 22, whatever that is. For sure.
What are we in? 922-101.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Larson, just organize it the way you want. So have your people come up.
Okay. This is Mark Meckler with COS Action.
Welcome, Mr. Meckler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today. As I was standing out in the hall outside waiting to come into this committee room, I was reflecting on the fact that I get the chance to travel around the country and go into a lot of state legislatures. And as I do, I often reflect on the founders and the framers and what they would have thought were they able to walk into this august house. And what I will tell you here in this legislature is I believe this is a reflection of what the framers and the founders intended. Some states, not so much. They're huge legislatures, year-round legislatures, not what I would refer to as a citizen legislature. But I could well imagine Ben Franklin or Sam Adams walking into this building, walking up and down these halls and feeling at home, and meeting men and women like you see in your legislature and feeling at home because they understand that you are citizens that give up your time and your money to come here and to do true public service. So thank you for being here and reflecting what the framers and founders actually intended in our system of governance. Convention of States is intended to restore that system of governance intended by the framers of the United States Constitution. And we know specifically what they intended and what they were worried about by referring to Madison's notes from the convention in 1787. We all know the story of that convention. It was a hot, humid summer. They locked themselves in that building and they hammered out what I would say is inarguably the greatest system of governance ever instituted among men for the preservation of liberty. But they also understood human nature better than I think most do these days, and they understood that humans were sinful, fallen creatures and likely to stray from the path of righteousness. Not only likely, but absolutely going to stray. And so they told us that they were going to give us a provision in that Constitution that would allow us to do something about that. On September 15th, 1787, Colonel George Mason stands and he addresses the convention. This is 2 days before the end of convention. They're almost done with that beautiful document. And he says, we have a problem. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but we've not given that power to the states. And he asks a question, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says basically, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Now, when I say that, people smile and laugh, and I imagine they did so at the convention. We don't know, obviously, we don't have videotape, but we do have Madison's notes. And Madison's notes very clearly at that point reflect what happened. It's two Latin abbreviations. It's the words nin com, which stand for no comment. What happened was everybody essentially slapped their foreheads and said, yes, we absolutely have to give this power to the states. How did we forget that? And we know that it was unanimous because they unanimously adopted this second clause of Article 5 that gives you the power that we're here to discuss. And they gave that power to you, the state legislators. And I have been asked many times, why would they give that power to the state legislators? When you guys come in and you get sworn into office, generally speaking, they don't tell you about your role in the federal government. You learn the building and where the legislative drafters are and maybe where your office is, but they don't tell you that you are actually the most powerful people in our system of federal governance. And what makes you the most powerful is this unique power that you have to call a convention, to propose amendments, and then ultimately to ratify those amendments, thereby changing the very structure of our system of governance that was given to you. And the reason that the framers gave that power to you is because they were you. Most of them served in colonial governments, in town councils. These were citizen public servants. They understood what it meant to be close to your constituents, and they wanted to give people the ultimate power who would be close to their constituents, like you are here in your state. You know the people in your district, and so did the framers. They understood this. So they gave you that power. And so here we are today. We have an organization that I represent, which has over 5 million grassroots activists all over the country in every single state legislative district, including here in Wyoming. And importantly, your constituents want you to do this. They want you to step up and rein in the federal government. Now, look, I don't think there's any argument among any of us that the federal government is completely out of control. The federal government is spending money at a pace that's unsustainable, regulating in a way that the American people are chafing under those regulations, and in a way that the framers and founders would have found absolutely unbelievable. And so we now find ourselves in a position where we actually can do something about it. Today, 19 out of the 34 requisite states have called for convention, states all across the country. I expect that we'll see somewhere between 4 and 7 more states join the call this session. The question is, will Wyoming? And the answer is, I believe, yes, and you should. Wyoming is, by the numbers, the most conservative state in the United States of America, if you look at the way your legislature lays out. And this is the actual most conservative thing that a legislature can do. It is about the restoration of the system of federalism given to us by the framers of the United States Constitution. So I can tell you a lot of people around the country, when I travel around, I was talking with somebody yesterday on my drive in from Denver, and they said, wait, you're going to Wyoming? I figured Wyoming would be the first state to pass. Why hasn't Wyoming passed yet? And obviously legislatures have their own way they work, and the composition of houses changes from time to time. There's a lot of reasons, but I would say at this point in history, it is hopefully time for Wyoming to step up and pass this resolution. I get the common objection, the actually only objection I get to doing this is that we're going to have a runaway convention. And we're going to, quote unquote, I hear this all the time, we're going to lose our beloved Constitution. So I'd like to address that, and then I'd be happy to take questions. The framers, in addition to understanding human nature, had a deep understanding of process and structure. And if you look at our Constitution, it was built to ensconce these processes and structure. Often we hear them referred to as checks and balances into our system. And one of those checks and balances was Article 5. And they designed Article 5 as well as they designed anything else in the Constitution. When you look at the way Article 5 works, the simplest argument against the Runaway Convention is math. It takes 3/4 of states to ratify anything that comes out of convention. Convention is only a meeting for making suggestions. The word proposal is used. They can propose amendments. And then that amendment, any amendment that's proposed by convention has to go out to the states for ratification by 38 states. And I would make this challenge to anybody watching or listening who is concerned about the idea of a runaway convention. If you're worried about something as a conservative that you might not like that could come out of convention, do the exercise for yourself and list the 38 states on a sheet of paper that would ratify it. I'm going to give you a specific example because you can't do that. The example, the one I hear most often, is that we're going to lose our Second Amendment. And my son is a Marine. My mom was a lifelong law enforcement officer. We're very strong Second Amendment supporters in my family and in our organization. There are currently 25 states that have constitutional carry. You don't need a permit to carry your firearm. There are 24 states, not here, but 24 states that allow you to carry your firearm into a legislature. There are 14 states that allow you to take a loaded long gun, chamber around, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that's how many states allow that to happen. Now, remember, it takes only 13 states to prevent any amendment from becoming part of the Constitution. So the idea that you could get 38 states to ratify the repeal of the Second Amendment, or frankly, anything else that any conservative wouldn't like, is a fantasy, and it's ridiculous. And it's important where we remember the idea of a runaway convention, where it comes from. In the United States of America, the idea of a runaway convention didn't exist until the 1970s. It came after Roe versus Wade. States started passing applications to overturn Roe versus Wade, what states should do when they're unhappy with what the Supreme Court does. And ultimately, a letter was written by Chief Justice Warren Burger, the man who was the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade, saying the idea of a convention was a terrible idea and that it would lead to a runaway convention and the destruction of our beloved Constitution. So the guy that gave us Roe versus Wade, a very radical liberal jurist, is the guy that puts the idea out there of a runaway convention. And unfortunately today, that idea has been carried by a few on the right. I would argue maybe 5 to 10% of the people on the right, and almost 100% of the people on the left. Common Cause, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, La Raza, MoveOn.org, Planned Parenthood, and I would argue, and I apologize for being a little bit inflammatory, but every communist, baby-killing, America-hating organization in the United States of America stands united, locking arms. They've signed a press release against Convention of States. So I would close with the idea that people are worried, I have heard this, about the left taking over. The left isn't worried about that at all. What they're worried about is the idea of us getting together in a convention of states and taking the federal government and shoving it back in the constitutional box. So I would urge you to pass this resolution out of committee and start the process here in Wyoming of joining the Convention of States movement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meckler. Any questions for the gentleman? Any questions? I have one. I often get emails that say the Constitution isn't broken. Follow the Constitution. Just follow what's there. And you've probably heard this argument too. And so, would you care to comment on that? I may add something too, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a good question. And it was actually, when this idea was first brought to me, that was the first question I asked. As a conservative, we generally have the opinion that the federal government doesn't follow the Constitution. And that question, I asked that question to Mike Ferris, who was my co-founder of this organization, noted constitutional attorney, one of the leading attorneys in the recent Dobbs case, just retired from being the leader of Alliance Defending Freedom. And this is what he said to me. He asked me a question which kind of shocked me. He said, "Which Constitution are you referring to?" Well, I'm only aware of one, is what I said. And he said, well, we really have two in the United States of America. We have the one that you probably carry around in your pocket, the pocket Constitution. It's actually the original Constitution. We all know what it says. We know what it means. It's pretty clear on its face what it means. He said, but if you want to know the Constitution under which the United States government lives, you have to order that from the government publishing office. And you can order, it's about $130. It's over 3,000 pages at this point, and it's literally just called the Constitution of the United States of America. It contains every case ever issued by the United States Supreme Court telling us what your pocket constitution means. And he said, so mostly they do follow the Constitution. It's just that one. And that's the one that has granted these wildly expanded federal powers that the framers never intended. And that's the one we're working to address with the Convention of States.
I like that answer. Any further questions for the gentleman? Thank you. Who else would you like to get to testify?
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yes.
So we open it to the public? Yes, sir. So we're going to get the fellow in the tie, and then we'll come to you, ma'am. Welcome, sir. We're glad you're here. What's your name? And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Iverson. I'm from Buffalo.
Yes,
I have a
sir.
degree in American history. I studied history at Regis University and earned a degree from one of Wyoming's great community colleges. I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, that I am not a communist, baby-killing Marxist, but I think that the Convention of States is a profoundly dangerous idea. And there's a number of reasons for this. You've heard a number of arguments as to why you should do this and why you should vote for this bill. And you've heard testimony that, well, there's process. We know how to do this. We know how it works. Well, quite frankly, members of the committee, there is not one single word beyond the one sentence in Article 5 that tells you how a Convention of States will work. It's not there. Now, one of the previous people that testified said, well, we have notes from the convention, perhaps, but they don't tell you any rules as to how this convention is going to operate. Now, I would ask you to think about what the very first thing you did at the opening of the 67th legislature was the first thing you debated. It was the rules, correct? So when the legislature convened, you all decided what rules by which you were going to operate. And in fact, the House changed a rule in contravention to what Mason's legislative procedure manual says. And so if you all decided that one of your rules was that everyone had to wear pink shoes on the floor of the House, you could make that rule. The same holds true for a Convention of States. Once it convenes, the rules will be decided there. So one of the previous people that just testified said that Warren Berger issued a letter to one of his constituents, and this morning I sent you a copy of that letter. And in it, he said that once this thing gets going, there's no stopping it. So once the convention is convened, they will decide the rules by which they will operate. And that's the way it will go. Now, why do we know that this will happen? Well, because the first and only constitutional convention did that very same thing. They had no authority to draft the United States Constitution. In fact, the only authority they were given was to revise the Articles of Confederation. But once the convention convened, they decided that it was of no use and they had to start over. They also changed the ratification level. They decided that 3/4 of the states would have to ratify the Constitution and not unanimous. So when their convention convened, they made the rules. So everything that you're hearing, that you're going to hear today about how there's procedure and how it will work, all of that is speculation at best. The next thing I would like to bring up is that there are a lot of thoughts about what we ought to do with the federal government, and certainly a lot of very important problems were already mentioned in today's hearing. We do have a runaway debt. We do have a federal government that is out of control. All of those things are absolutely true. But members of the committee, if you pass this Convention of States, you are putting the people who created the problem in charge of the solution. We do not have a problem with the Constitution. We have a problem with politicians. And if you pass this, you will put the power to change or to try to fix that problem in the hands of the very people that created it. Now, one thing I want you to think about, the sponsor of this bill listed off all of the problems that we have with in our country today. And if you read this resolution, it says they want to fix 3 problems. They want fiscal restraints. My first question would be, what the heck is a fiscal restraint? I mean, that could mean anything. I mean, it could be any number of decisions that you make. They want to limit the power of the federal government. What does that mean? How does that work out? What is the language behind that? What are you going to direct your delegates to do? I mean, how, it's not specific at all. And then they want term limits. That's the last one. That one's pretty specific. But the sponsor of this bill said that they wanted to limit the amount of time that a Supreme Court justice could serve. Wait a minute, that's not listed in the resolution, now is it? What he's telling you is that amendments would be proposed at this constitutional convention that are not listed in this resolution. And that is further evidence that you'll have no control over this convention at all. The final thing I would like to mention, and this is something that Senator Landon has lamented a couple times in this committee hearing, that politics being what they are, things are very uncertain. And if you look at the resolution that was passed in 2017 by Wyoming, it says that the delegates to this convention will be members of the legislature. Who do you suppose will be chosen? If more liberal contingent of our legislature is in charge, well, then it will be more liberal delegates that are chosen. And if it so happens that more conservative people are in charge of the legislature, well, then it'll be more conservative people that are sent. But what I'm getting to here is none of this is certain. Now, you're going to hear a lot of testimony here in a little bit as to how this is going to work exactly one way, and we know how it is going to work. But I would ask you to question them. Show me where. Show me where the rules are written down. Show me how this is going to operate, because I guarantee you it's not in our founding documents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. Iverson? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, looking at the limitations at the bottom of page 2, they're talking about imposing, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. I suppose if somebody proposed eliminating some of the regulations in the banking industry, say get rid of the Federal Reserve, that would limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, would it not?
Mr. Iverson.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I would agree with you. It would limit the power of the federal government. But again, in this resolution, it doesn't say that. It's just a very vague comment.
I think that's your point, right, Senator Scott?
Yeah, exactly. I think they could, some of the economic things are subject to enthusiasms. And we could very well see some of those, Mr. Chairman. That's one of the things that gives me great pause about this resolution.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Iverson.
Mr. Chairman, I did forget to bring up one thing, if you wouldn't mind. The folks the main group that pushes Convention of States, and this may come as a surprise to you, I sent this document to you as well. They've developed their own constitution. In fact, they call it a conservative constitution. Now, you're going to hear lots of explanations about that, but if you will permit me, I'd like to read you one brief section out of it.
Okay, go ahead.
In Wyoming, one of the most important things is our firearms. The document I sent you on page 13, it's the second paragraph down. Let me read it to you. Quote, "The modified Second Amendment clarifies what we understand to be the best original understanding it provides. Neither the states nor the United States shall make or enforce any law infringing the right to keep and bear arms of the sort ordinarily used for self-defense or recreational purposes, provided that the states, the United States, in places subject to its general regulatory authority, may enact and enforce reasonable regulations on the bearing of arms and the keeping of arms by persons determined with due process to be dangerous to themselves or others." My point here, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is they very much are thinking about the Second Amendment, and it's written in that document that I sent you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, sir, but we have no idea what that document is that you're sending or if it's connected to these people, so we'll let them address that.
Certainly.
I appreciate your testimony, and thank you very much. Ma'am, we'll go to you next. Is that okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Landon.
No, Mr. Chairman, just a point of order. I would really appreciate it if we have some respect for everyone who steps up to the microphone. And we really don't need head shaking behind everybody, and it's a little distracting. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Green light.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Julie Baker. I'm the Wyoming State Director for Convention of States, and I live near Hewlett. And I'd like to speak a little bit to the grassroots support for this Article 5 convention for proposing amendments. And I know you've all received emails or phone calls or requests for meetings asking for your support for this Article 5 convention. What you might not know is that thousands of Wyoming constituents support this effort, and they've demonstrated this by signing the Convention of States petition, and that's in excess of 12,000 Wyoming constituents. Wyoming has one of, if not the highest number of petitions signed per capita in the country, and yet 19 other states have responded to their constituents ahead of us. These constituents took the time to let you know they're frustrated with Washington, D.C., squandering our resources, squandering our money, telling us what we can and can't buy. They're regulating us into servitude, and they're relying on you to use the power of Article 5 to restrain that, to rectify this problem. Convention of States volunteers all across the state have reached out to people at fairs and gun shows and town halls and street markets. And we're showing them that there's hope in the Constitution in Article 5, that in the overwhelming reaction when you talk to people is relief and joy that there's actually a solution, and it's in Article 5 of the Constitution. And then that relief and joy is quickly followed by a stunned disbelief that Wyoming wasn't the first one to pass it. And we didn't lead the charge, and we're falling behind. Alexander Hamilton, who said a lot of things, and he had a lot to say about federalism. And at the New York State Ratifying Convention, he said this, and I quote, "This balance between the national and state governments ought to be dwelt on with peculiar attention, as it is of the utmost importance. It forms a double security to the people. If one encroaches on their rights, they'll find a powerful protection in the other. Indeed, they will both be prevented from overpassing their constitutional limits by a certain rivalship which will ever subsist between them." And sadly, in the past decades, we haven't seen much of this rivalship that he spoke of. And it sounds amazing, because it is, that the framers' forethought gave us this most powerful, peaceful, legal, and constitutional method to end this madness that we find ourselves in. All we're asking for is a meeting. It's simply a meeting where people suggest stuff. They get together, they talk, they debate, and they propose. That's all the convention is. It's a proposing body. So to encourage the Wyoming legislature to engage in the rivalship that Hamilton spoke of, you'll continue to receive emails and get phone calls and requests for meetings. And this is Wyoming's opportunity to become state number 20. When people hear of this, support only grows. It's time to finally join Florida and Texas and Oklahoma and Utah and Nebraska and 14 other states to bring enduring structural reforms to the federal government that reflect the original intent of the founders. Please take into consideration all these constituents, the supporters in this room, the supporters that are no doubt going to be on Zoom, the hundreds in your districts, and the thousands across Wyoming, and vote yes on SJ 11.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Any questions? I'll do my best.
Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who's next? Anybody in this room who else would like to testify? Is there anybody on Zoom? Oh, Marguerite, Ms. Harriman? You got to be quick. We're at the hard stop at 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thought I'd be the last in line, at long line, so I wasn't ready. I'm sorry. So Marguerite Herman for the League of Women Voters, and I'll just relate to you the position our National League has taken. It was amended about 5 years ago on the Convention of States ideas. And as the previous speaker said, we are neither communist nor, we don't advocate the killing of anybody, actually. So the League of Women Voters, and this is a position adopted by our National Convention for 2018. The League of Women Voters is concerned that these are many unresolved questions about the powers and processes of Article 5. The League believes such a convention should be called only if the following conditions are in place, and I'll read these real fast. The convention must be transparent, not conducted in secret. The public has a right to know. Representation at the Constitutional Convention must be based on population rather than one state, one vote. I know that'll rub a wrong way in Wyoming, and delegates should be elected rather than appointed. Delegates represent citizens, should be elected by them. Voting at the convention must be by delegate, not by state. Delegates from one state can have varying views and should be able to express them by individual votes. And the convention must be limited to a specific topic. It is important to guard against runaway conventions, as has been stated. Only state resolutions on a single topic count when determining if a convention should be called. Counting state requests by topic ensures that there is sufficient interest in a particular subject. The validity of state calls for Article 5 Constitutional Convention must be determined by the most recent action of the state. If a state has enacted a rescission of its call, that rescission must be respected by Congress. And all I have to say is that currently there are no rules in place, as has been stated. It's just that you can do this. And these things would be the sideboards to make sure it didn't turn into something untoward and destroy the Constitution that we have today. So absent these conditions, which do not exist, we agree with the previous speaker that this is not a wise move. And also, let me just mention that in amending our own Wyoming Constitution, you do not trust the people to put their own proposals on the ballot. They cannot do that. And you've made it virtually impossible for even initiatives. So I think that the sense of this body is that a deliberative, a representatively elected body is the one and the best place to write constitutions and then put those before the voters. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Herman? Any questions? Thank you. Do we have people online? I'm looking, let's get a couple of people online up, and I'm looking at this room. Yes, sir, I didn't see you behind a pillar. Come on up. But let's get some people ready online so that we're not, get them in the room and stuff. Welcome, sir. How are you today? Go ahead. Green light.
I have a green light.
There you go.
All right. Mr. Chairman, Senators, thank you for giving me the time here to speak, the opportunity to speak. I am a veteran, and I love the state of Wyoming, but I also love this country. But this is not the country I grew up in. As far as I'm concerned, this country has turned to tyranny.
I'm just not sure we got your name, sir.
Robert Rice.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry,
Robert Rice.
I may not have given it.
Yeah, I may not have.
And I
you
just
down.
went right through my mind.
It's okay. Go ahead, sir. I didn't mean to.
We have a government now that's trying to control everything we do, everything we think. It is spending money. I was going to use a metaphor, but I do not.
Let's tone it down here.
Yeah, I do not believe that it's appropriate for this.
Yeah.
This meeting, but we're spending money that we don't have, and we are going to destroy the future, just not of our children or grandchildren. It's going to go to our great-grandchildren, our great-great-grandchildren, if it's not brought under control. There's not a problem with the Constitution. And if the government, federal government, is not obeying the Constitution we have right now, amending it means nothing. They won't buy it either. If they're not standing within the bounds of the Constitution, they will not stand in the bounds of an amendment. The only way we can reign in the country is if we do what this country was founded, we the people. You guys are our representatives. You are our voices. The state has the power to tell the federal government, I will not comply. I will not enforce unconstitutional laws. The problem is many states have been bought off with money. We want that federal money. You asked me to tighten my belts and not feed my family. I'm not talking about you all, but I'm talking about the government. To make a decision between paying for the heat or putting dinner on the table. It's time we tighten our belts in this state. Tell the federal government to back off, back down. We don't need an amendment. We need to exercise the power that was given to the state and the people by Articles 9 and 10 of the Bill of Rights. We have the ability. It is we the people. It's not a new amendment. It's not reigning in the country with words written down on a paper. It's reigning in a country by the actions of its citizens. If we stand around, we have stood around, allowed the country to do whatever it wanted to do, and we kept silent. And now all of a sudden, we're all concerned about the runaway. We're all concerned about the problems in this country. Where have the states been all this time? Where have I been? I'm asking that we, as a state, vote against joining this Convention of States. It won't work. I fully believe it. I agree with those that are standing against it. It's not a conservative or liberal issue. It's, can we be the country we were at one time? I have much more to say, but I'm not willing to go that long. I would like someone else a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Questions for Mr. Rice? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's go online and hear from Patrick, Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald,
Yes, sir.
go ahead.
This is Patrick Fitzgerald from Cheyenne. Gentlemen, I
Can
come
you speak
before
up,
you
sir? We're
today-
having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, I will speak up. Gentlemen, I come before you today to urge your support for SJ 11 to allow the state of Wyoming to join others in calling for a convention of states which would propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution. This is a method of proposing amendments which is given equal status and force by the Constitution with the sole other method used for all amendments to date. Existing amendments have all been drafted and proposed by the federal Congress. Such a body of representatives from the states will have no power to enact any changes to the Constitution. Furthermore, all amendments will have no effect until each one individually is ratified by 3/4 of the legislatures of the several states. It is fully irrational to fear that 38 states together would allow any amendment to abolish any of our dearly held rights, to usurp the supreme law of the land, or to remove any power whatsoever from we the people. Inasmuch as the rights and responsibilities of the several states have been usurped over the past 150 years by the federal Congress and by their bureaucracies, which assume legislative and police powers over us, it is not reasonable to assume that power can be wrested from the bureaucracies and from Congress through any measure proposed by that Congress. The Constitution is a document forming a federal government of very few enumerated powers. The Bill of Rights is an essential part of that document, and each one of its 10 amendments states what the federal government cannot do. I urge you, representatives of Wyoming, to join this effort to assert your right to curb the powers and abuses of the federal government, and under the 10th Amendment, to return rightful and just power to Wyoming, the several states, and to the people. To restore and strengthen our God-given liberty, it is essential that this committee recommend SJ 11 to the consideration of the full body of the legislature of the great and independent state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Any questions by the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you, sir. Let's check back in the room here. Who else would like to testify? Yes, sir, back in the corner. And Kelly, you can get someone else online, and we'll come to that gentleman next. Hi, how are you? Okay. Just hand them to me, and you can go take your seat, and or just hand the stack. Okay. One more. We're kind of on a time crunch, so thank you, sir. Welcome, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. My name is Duncan Stewart. I am a retired 30-year veteran law enforcement officer on the state and federal level. I'd like to discuss how the federal government imposes itself upon states and how it affects that state, and in my particular case, the state of Connecticut, the ruination of the state. In 1980, there was no income tax in Connecticut. It was a relatively centrist, leftist, socially, very fiscally conservative, and to a degree libertarian. By 1985, we had an income tax. We also had the crack epidemic. And that's how the government, the federal government, imposed itself upon the state, in at least from the law enforcement perspective. There were many homicides, many officer-involved shootings, things where police departments didn't have the money, even the state police, to actually address these issues. So in comes the federal government. First, it came in the form of grants, money handed over millions and millions of dollars to hire additional policemen, for buying money to buy guns, all other things. After that, the task forces came in. Now, task forces, where a federal agency would, I should say, empower local police and state police in a task force. But the federal government would have complete control of that task force. They would set the rules, and they would infringe upon any state law that they felt suitable. That anything that would then go to the United States Attorney rather than be on a local level in state courts. And that's because state courts were overrun, prisons were full, and at the same time, the general population was clamoring, fix this problem. So money came in first, then the infringement upon people in the state through federal bureaucracy, and I think these are two of the things that Convention of States addresses. Government interference and money. And, from my perspective in law enforcement was only a small part of it. Many other areas in Wyoming here, we have a big, one of our great sources of income is energy. Well, we know that's infringed upon. Would abortion be, or other social issues be infringed upon? Once the federal government gets its tentacles into a state via money, you can't let it go. Those police departments and the state police, they're not going to give up that money. Once that money is there and let's say you hire troopers, you hire cops, you're never going to fire those people. So now those officials are so beholden to the federal government. Also, you have these dissent decrees where if a police department does something that the federal government likes, they come in and take over that police department. They rewrite all their rules of engagement, their policies and procedures, their techniques. I mean, you're going to see that happen now in Memphis, maybe rightfully so. But now that's a way that the federal government wants to federalize local police departments.
So I'm going to ask you to kind of get to the point, sir.
Okay.
Are you supporting the convention?
I'm supporting the Convention of State because I think these things and this money that comes into states and all of these rules and regulations that the federal government makes, I believe there is no other alternative.
The federal government has its tentacles in. What is the other alternative to fix these problems other than a convention of states? If there is, I'd be certainly glad to entertain that, but I cannot see that happening.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Stewart? Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Thank you very much. Let's go online to the gentleman in the top corner, the dark hair with the tie. Who is that? Can you see, Kelly? Is it Mr. Stahl?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Stahl. All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Eldon Stahl, and I live in Evanston, Wyoming, representing myself. I'm opposed to SJ 11 for many reasons, but there are two which I would like to highlight today as supported by statements of top leaders of the Convention of States project. Links to watch the videos yourself of them saying this at the appropriate timestamp or in my written testimony, which you should have. First, in August of 2013, when COS project was being launched, Michael Ferris, Convention of States co-founder, said, quote, "The greatest thing we can achieve out of a convention is if they mess it up again, we call another convention," end quote. A former U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania and national spokesman for Convention of States last December said in South Dakota, quote, "I really believe we need to institute the Article 5 Convention as a normal thing that the legislatures do, that every 5 or 10 years they have a convention," end quote. So why would the greatest achievement of a convention be to have a perpetual cycle of conventions? Not a balanced budget amendment, term limits, or getting rid of income tax. It's no specific change, just change. Those three subjects that you have in this resolution before you today, to which the convention would be supposedly limited, are just bait to get legislators to agree to opening up a process of perpetual change to the supreme law of the land. And as the U.S. Senator implied, these same folks will be back immediately lobbying for endless conventions. Did they mention that when they lobbied you? Second, the changes Ferris had in mind are much more substantial than most legislators would assume would be within the scope of this resolution. For example, did anyone here think of rewriting or abolishing the whole third article of the U.S. Constitution dealing with the federal judiciary? Why not? Because back in August of 2013 at the ALEC meeting, Mr. Ferris, COS co-founder, said, quote, "One thing I would do is I would make it like the European Court of Justice. We should have 50 Supreme Court justices, and they should be appointed by the state legislatures," end quote. Then he went on to say, quote, "If they, the Supreme Court, abuse it, we just keep calling, quote, so if the Supreme Court messes up, okay, let's abolish it. If they're going to ignore the Constitution, we abolish the Supreme Court and figure out some other way to settle the disputes," end quote.
So, Mr. Stahl, I need you to wrap it up. I'm not sure that anybody has testified to that today about things that happened in 2013, but please wrap it up if you could, sir.
Sure. In short, Ferris and other COS people have major sweeping and perpetual changes in mind, and their words, not mine, expose them. I respectfully urge you to table SJ 11 and stand by for any questions, such as 3-4 safety net, constitutional, conservative constitution, left-wing supporters, the convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Stahl. Questions for Mr. Stahl? Thank you, sir. Let's go to the next to the gentleman. Kelly, I can't see his name. I'm sorry, you guys speak louder. What is the gentleman's name? Shafley, Mr. Shafley.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Andy Schlafly. I think many of you may
Schlafly. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Come on in.
fine. No problem at all. So I'm an attorney. I practice before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, which is where appeals from Wyoming go. I think many of you may have been familiar with my mother, Phyllis Schlafly, who worked for 70 years, really, to try to help our country and advance conservative principles. And frankly,
Of-
she was right
of-
about a lot of issues.
Of course, we remember your mother, and that's kind of an exciting connection. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Well, she felt very strongly against holding a new Article 5 convention. We've never had an Article 5 convention. She called it a constitutional convention. She called it a con-con, and she testified again and again against this idea that's on the table today. So she would have been against this joint resolution 11, very much so. In fact, she told me that this was among the most important work she ever did her entire life, was opposing a constitutional convention, because you don't know what's going to happen, as many of the witnesses have testified already. There's no limit to it. And several witnesses who testified in support of this resolution said, well, don't worry, because 3/4 of the states would still have to ratify it before it changed the Constitution. Well, no, in fact, Article 5 says that the convention can dictate how it will be ratified, as the original convention did. It set the rules for ratification. So we get this group of people be dominated by California and New York. We had a witness who said it has to be by population, so you get the big population states. They're going to decide how this new constitution is ratified. There aren't going to be these restraints that the supporters of the resolution have claimed there would be. I was sitting there in attendance when Justice Scalia, whom many of us admire, in the last year of his life, was fielding questions from the audience, and someone asked him, Justice, what do you think of holding a constitutional convention? And he said, quote, horrible idea, close quote. That's what he said of this constitutional convention, because it can change everything. It can take out the Second Amendment. It can change all the safeguards we have in our Constitution, which is a pretty good document. Many of us consider.
Mr. Schlafly, can you wrap it up?
Yes.
Can I get you to wrap it up?
Thank you, sir. So finally, just to address the debt issue, the federal debt, well, Speaker McCarthy is meeting with President Biden tomorrow about the debt ceiling, and he can hold the line on the debt ceiling. So we have the means to hold the line on federal debt and take care of that problem. We don't need to open up all these other issues with the Constitutional Convention to address federal debt.
Thank you,
very
sir.
much, Chairman.
We do appreciate it. Any questions? Let's go to the ma'am, the lady on screen, and then we're going to call this quits, and we'll take it up again Thursday morning. I do know that there were some allegations made, Mr. Meckler, so we would entertain you being here on Thursday, or you could appear by Zoom to address some of the, I think there were allegations and you should have some rebuttal. So ma'am, would you go ahead? And your name is Ms. Martin?
Joanna Martin, retired attorney.
Yes, ma'am.
I speak for myself against SJ 11. My written testimony is an exhibit list with the proof of what I'll say. Our Declaration of Independence recognizes that a people have the self-evident right to throw off one government and set up a new one. James Madison, a delegate to the Federal Convention of 1787, where our present Constitution was drafted, invoked this principle as justification for the delegates ignoring their instructions to propose amendments to the Articles of Confederation and drafting a new Constitution, which created a new government. And the new Constitution provided it would be provided when only 9 of the 13 states approved it, whereas the Articles of Confederation required all of the states and the Congress to approve amendments to the Articles. But soon after our new Constitution was ratified, and even before the new government went into operation, the Anti-Federalists started pushing for an Article 5 convention. Patrick Henry got the Virginia legislature to pass an application for Congress to call a convention. This application was presented to Congress right after the new government went into operation. Now, John Jay, who became our first Chief Justice, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, understood the right of the people to throw off their government. So when they saw what the Anti-Federalists were up to, they started warning against an Article 5 convention. My Brilliant Men flyer shows their warnings. Item 5 on the exhibit list shows what George Mason really said at the convention, and it's not what you heard today.
Okay, ma'am. I'm so sorry, but we're literally against a hard stop because somebody has this room. So 1 minute to finish up, please. 1 minute.
Item 5 also shows that Madison warned that those who secretly wish to get a new constitution would push for an Article 5 convention under the pretext of getting amendments. That's what's going on today. New constitutions are already prepared or in the works, and one of them has been prepared by Professor Robert P. George, who is a member of Mark Meckler's Convention of States Legal Advisory Board. That proposed new constitution provides constitutional authority for gun controls and red flag confiscations. Mr. Chairman, may I come back at the next hearing and finish? Please.
Ma'am, I'm going to think about that, but we're going to cut you off now. So everybody, we're going to adjourn the meeting because this room's booked for the Republican caucus. I do want to say there are some of the charges against the Convention of State folks. I'll let you address that. And we will take up Senator Beitman's bill and we will finish it. And then we will work on this a little bit more. We have other things to do. We're adjourned. Thursday morning, probably be an early start.